A young man is in the middle of one of his regular night jogs through the park. He loves running through this park at night. It's dark, the air is cool, and the sounds of the city that surround the park disappear, offering peace, quiet, and a small reprieve from the busy world. He jogs along a path that winds through the park and starts upon a section that is surrounded on both sides by tall trees. He follows the path around a sharp bend and is stopped in his tracks. Standing there, in the middle of the track, is a figure. It has its back to him and isn't moving. He's tall and so uniformly black that he almost disappears into the night. Whoever or whatever this is, he's scared of it. But the creature doesn't move, and neither does he. He's frozen, unsure of what to do, when the creature suddenly turns his head towards him, revealing a pair of bright, glowing eyes. The runner is so terrified he can't even scream. He falls and crawls backwards in the dirt, trying to get away from the creature. The creature turns its body towards him and begins stepping forward. The runner scrambles to his feet and runs. He's sprinting as hard and as fast as he can, adrenaline pumping, heart pounding, trying to put as much distance as he can between himself and that thing. His muscles burn, his lungs ache, but he can't stop. Finally, he's back at his house. He bursts through the door, locking and bolting it behind him. His girlfriend is reading on the couch and doesn't understand what's going on. After struggling to catch his breath, he tries to explain what he saw on the path, but his girlfriend just laughs. A giant man with glowing eyes? He was just seeing things in the dark. It was probably a dog, nothing that would justify the panic he was now in. The next day, he's left wondering if he really was mistaken. Those piercing, glowing eyes are burned into his mind, though. Maybe his girlfriend was right, and it really was just a dog. Yes, that must be it. His mind was just playing tricks on him in the dark. Even so, he's going to stick to running inside, at least for a little while. But he soon finds that he's having a hard time. He notices that he's running out of breath much quicker than normal. Is he coming down with something? He doesn't feel sick, but then why is he suddenly so weak? 2 weeks have passed since he saw something in the park. No one he brought it up to, not his friends, not his co-workers, have ever heard of such a thing, and no one seemed like they believed him either. At this point, he is feeling sure that he really did imagine it, but he can't get that image of whatever it was out of his head. He can't keep running on a treadmill forever, though. He misses his night runs. It's time to get over his fear. He's running through the park again, enjoying the silence and the light breeze on his skin. He continues down the path, acutely aware that he's getting closer and closer to the spot where he saw that thing before. He can't stop, though. He has to prove to everyone that he's not afraid. He has to prove it to himself. He reaches the part of the path that runs through the tall trees. Just like before, the sounds of the city melt away, the only sound coming from his steady, heavy breathing. He follows the winding path and feels his heart starting to race, but he has to keep going. He rounds the same corner, and nothing is there. He slows to a stop. Of course nothing is here. Nothing ever was. He really did imagine it. Or did he? Buongiorno. Today's file comes from the Italian branch of the SCP Foundation, SCP-015-IT, also known as The Boogeyman. SCP-015-IT is a humanoid entity that stands just under 2 meters tall. Its body is devoid of any hair, and its dark, black skin absorbs 98% of all light, making it virtually invisible in low light. Its head lacks a nose or ears, but these missing features are hardly noticed, because if you see 015-IT, its eyes are what demand all of your attention. While the Boogeyman's skin is completely black, its eyes contain light-producing organs on the irises, causing them to glow in the dark, like a deep-sea predator. Its mouth contains 8 pointed teeth on both the upper and lower jaws, and a long 28-centimeter forked tongue. The 2 tips of its tongue each have a hollow needle-like organ that leads straight into its esophagus. More on what it does with that specialized biological feature soon. Physically, SCP-015-IT is rather slight, but it is surprisingly strong and easily able to overpower an adult human. Its skinny arms are much longer than an average human's, and each of its 4 fingers ends in a razor-sharp claw. It has also been shown to be quite resistant to physical injuries and possesses the ability to heal wounds and damage to internal organs at a hyper-accelerated rate. SCP-015-IT is primarily active at night, which is unsurprising given its skin's natural camouflage in the dark. The Boogeyman hunts mammals, with humans being its preferred prey, but it does not feed on flesh. Instead, SCP-015-IT draws its sustenance from the adrenaline and noradrenaline produced by its quarry. Adrenaline and noradrenaline are chemicals the body produces to increase heart rate, blood flow, and provide more energy to the muscles in moments of stress, or in the case of SCP-015-IT, extreme fear. And it has developed a hunting method to cause this exact reaction in humans. 015-IT will usually hide in dark spots, trying to keep out of sight as much as possible as it stalks its next victim. If it has been able to remain unseen, it will wait for a moment when its prey has become distracted so it can silently approach them. Once close enough, it will leap towards its unaware victim, grab them, and quickly bite them on the side of the torso, near where the adrenal gland is located. It uses its large teeth to anchor its mouth in place, as it uses the needles on its forked tongue to probe into their body. With one needle, it pierces directly into the adrenal gland and begins draining the blood that is now rich with fear-induced adrenaline. At the exact same time, the other needle releases a mild sedative, allowing 015-IT to feed and then depart without risk, as the victim remains immobile. Another anomalous effect occurs when someone is unlucky enough to actually see the Boogeyman. Roughly 2 weeks after observing the creature, the person who saw it will begin experiencing various detrimental mental effects, including hallucinations and panic attacks. Some will also begin to experience physical issues, most often damage to the cardiovascular system. It is unknown why exactly these mental and physical effects occur, but it is theorized that SCP-015-IT may use it as a way to weaken certain prey that it considers too strong or potentially dangerous. In 2011, the Boogeyman was actually contained, but not by the SCP Foundation. The Brotherhood of St. George's Knights is a secret order in the Catholic Church that was created by the Pope in the year 453 to either contain or eliminate all anomalies, and it was this group that first captured SCP-015-IT, which they designated as Dia 212, in line with their own classification system. While it was in their containment, they made a number of discoveries about the creature that they labeled as a shadow demon. First, they found that while it feeds on the fear of its victims by ingesting their blood, it doesn't actually require this to survive. Dia 212, as they call it, is an unstable entity, and feeding allows it to maintain its physical shape in our reality. In addition to its impressive physical strength, the Boogeyman is also quite intelligent, as seen by its ability to successfully hunt, attack, and escape from humans. Strangely, it also appears to be resistant to weapons which have been blessed, causing only a fraction of the physical damage that they should when compared to a similar, non-holy version. During the course of research into the creature, Father Ilardi, a member of the Brotherhood of St. George's Knights, wrote that despite the creature being repugnant beyond every limit, he believed that it had a gentle soul, and that its screams are similar to a pained cry. He postulated that SCP-015-IT may have even once been a human before some dark force transformed it into the monster that it had become. He decided that it was his mission to find a way to communicate with the creature, and one day bring it back into the light and love of his god. Father Ilardi was making good progress with the creature, and it seemed like it was even growing fond of him and his disciples. But his advances were halted when they were attacked by a group of soldiers from the Fascist Council of the Occult, a terrorist group that seeks to use anomalies as weapons in their quest to disrupt the social order. In the attack, several of the Brotherhood were killed, and in the commotion, SCP-015-IT escaped. Following this, reports soon began to come from the province of Caserta that described what sounded like vampire attacks. A mobile task force was sent to the area, and while 015-IT was initially able to make use of its various physical abilities to evade and escape capture, it was eventually shot with a transmitter that allowed it to be tracked. The Italian mobile task force was able to surround the creature, but fearing being contained again, it responded with a level of violence that it had not been thought capable of. Several members of the task force were killed in the line of duty before the Boogeyman could finally be subdued. Today, SCP-015-IT is contained at Site Vittoria in the Emilia-Romagna region of Italy. Since this anomaly is both sentient and highly unpredictable in its behavior, it has been classified as Euclid. It is kept in a standard humanoid entity containment cell and is monitored by video cameras and infrared sensors at all times. Due to the light-absorbing properties of its skin, its cell and the adjacent corridors are painted white and are to be kept well lit at all times. Twice a day, SCP-015-IT is given a normal domestic pig that it is allowed to feed on. Any personnel assigned to 015-IT duty must undergo a psychological assessment on a weekly basis, and, regardless of the results, must be cycled out after 3 months of exposure to the Boogeyman.
Hello everyone, DrBob here. I know you're not used to seeing me here at the start of videos, but that's because today we have an extremely pressing matter to attend to, one that cuts to the deepest core of one of the SCP Foundation's deadliest contained anomalies, SCP-096, the Shy Guy. It's a creature that needs no introduction because it probably haunts all of your nightmares already. Close your eyes and picture it in your mind's eye, that gaunt face with the slack jaw and the lifeless white eyes. The face you hope never to see as long as you live. The pale skin pulled tight against bone, those impossibly long, gangly limbs. It sits there in its airtight containment cube, covering its face and quietly sobbing, always sobbing, as though cursing something beyond even its own understanding. Perhaps, when thinking about SCP-096, you feel a pang of sympathy mixed with the terror. After all, this anomaly is no sadist. Why would a sadist cry as it kills, like SCP-096 does? You're not alone in asking this question. I've spent many a night poring over classified files with an ever-freshening pot of coffee, trying to piece together the answers. SCP-096 is considered one of the most dangerous Euclid-class creatures in containment, and yet, so little about it is known, beyond its capability to do great harm whenever someone is unlucky enough to see its face and send it into its rage state. How did this happen? It's a question for the curious, like you or me, and after months of strenuous research, I believe I may have an answer. Whether you choose to believe it is up to you. Just be warned, when you hear what I believe to be the heartbreaking, tragic origin of this terrifying and pitiful monster, you may never be able to look at him the same way again. Not that looking at him should ever be high on your list of priorities. It begins in a tavern in a small Nepalese village a few miles away from the Chinese border, where Mount Everest, the world's tallest mountain above sea level, waits. Its mere existence is like a challenge to the brave and foolhardy. "Conquer me," it seems to whisper. "Conquer me, and declare yourself above all those I have conquered. Become a god among men." It's always whispering like this, but few, in the grand scheme of things, can actually hear it. And sadly for him, the explorer is among those few. He's sitting in one of the tavern's many cozy nooks, picking away at a plate of mutton curry while sipping from a brass bowl of white chiang, a popular local drink. The explorer, living up to his name, has come a long way to get here. The rest of the village locals in the tavern eye him with a variety of knowing glances. They've seen so many like him before, smug smiles and puffed chests, thinking they'll be able to count themselves among the exalted few who've conquered the mountain to end all mountains. The bodies of many men like this are still frozen to the mountain's surface. One brave local, an older man who can speak English fluently, slides in across the table from the explorer. The old-timer tells him that whatever he thinks he'll find up on the mountain, honor, glory, recognition, he'd be better off searching for it elsewhere. Death awaits on the icy rocks above. The explorer, young, fit, and still feeling mighty smug, replies that death is there for the people who haven't worked hard enough, who haven't prepared. He's scaled other mountains before, all across the globe, from Scotland to Peru. Everest would hold no surprises for him, just a new, compelling challenge. The old man is, as you could probably imagine, unamused by the explorer's hubris. "All confidence and bluster now," he says with his thin, raspy voice. "But what will you say when you're face to face with the king?" The explorer, assuming that this king refers to the mountain itself, smiles and replies, "I'll ask him for his crown." With that, the old man leaves, content that he at least tried to dissuade the explorer from going on this doomed journey. If nothing else, his conscience would be clear now. He had done all that he possibly could. The explorer, not bothered by the grim prophecies of superstitious locals, finishes his curry and chiang and retires to the room he rented upstairs. He's so excited. Tomorrow, it will finally be time. All his months of training will pay off. He will climb to Mount Everest's peak. It would be an achievement to last a whole lifetime, one he would never ever forget, no matter how much he wants to. The next day, the tip of his ice axe cleaves into the mountainside as he grunts, strains, and pulls himself up another few feet. He's about 2,000 meters up, and every additional meter is fighting him. It's the bitterest cold he's ever known, a freeze so deep it makes his incredibly expensive thermal locking clothes feel like he's wearing wet, one-ply toilet paper. But the pain doesn't matter. The cold doesn't matter. He finds it exhilarating. Of course, just as the old man had warned, death could be waiting for him on this mountain, but the truth is, the explorer has never felt more alive. He winches himself up a few feet more, trying to regulate his breathing as his icy fingers, wrapped in thick gloves, struggle to find purchase on what feels like a sheer cliff face. There are many times when he's supporting his full body weight with only his hands. It often takes the kind of Herculean strength that only a lifetime of training can give you. After all, there's no room for error on Mount Everest. One wrong move, and you're either plummeting to your death or becoming a permanent frozen fixture of the mountainside. And because Everest is so dangerous, nobody comes to collect the bodies of dead mountaineering hopefuls. Their corpses, coated in often colorful winter jackets, litter the mountain. Some look at them as a tragic warning. Other, more morbid mountaineers use them as mile markers for their own more successful ascents. Whether the explorer would be lucky or become just another dead, frozen mile marker is still entirely up to chance. He climbs for a few more hours, pushing past his body's complaints, his physical limitations, until he reaches a well-earned plateau. Here, he establishes a small base camp and eats some of his rations. The area is thankfully guarded enough to keep out the worst of the sub-zero winds, so he can at least get some sleep without freezing to death. Mount Everest cannot be conquered today, and even someone with the explorer's bravado wouldn't dare to try. But as he settles down to sleep for the night, he can't help but look up, and the enormity of what stands before him he finds utterly terrifying. The mountain just keeps going and going and going, stretching up into the misty heavens, like the tip would only be a short jump from the moon. For the first time, the explorer begins to genuinely wonder, will I scale this mountain, or will I die on it? What he never even considers is that there may be a third option that's so much worse. Over the next few days, he keeps climbing further and further. Hundreds, then thousands of meters pass under him as he breaks past even the boundaries biology seemed to set for him. He's impossible to deter, an engine of pure, burning willpower, going because he knows he cannot stop. Because he knows that if he throws in the towel now, it will have all been for nothing. He'll be just another failure, one speck among billions. He'll have no meaning, no legacy. He'll just be another average Joe, forgotten. And that honestly scares him even more than the prospect of freezing to death up here. Eventually, even though it costs him almost everything to do it, he reaches 8,000 meters, an area known as the Death Zone, where it's believed to be impossible for humans to acclimate. This is the thin, rarefied air that few have been permitted to breathe, and he's seen so many brightly colored mile markers on the way to here. The ground is slippery, and the air chews into the explorer's skin, but he knows he's made it this far. Less than 1,000 meters from the peak now, he has almost conquered the mountain. So you can only imagine how surprised he feels when he sees another mountaineer walking down the side of the mountain towards him with an eerie kind of casualness. He's wearing standard mountain climbing gear, including white thermal pants and a hooded coat, zipped up to the chin. The explorer can't make out the stranger's face beyond the pair of thick, black goggles he's wearing over his eyes. What the hell is going on here? The second the stranger's eyes fall upon him, he feels a frightening sensation. The bite of the cold is gone. The chilling winds can't reach him. Instead, he feels warm, cozy, and content, like he's sitting in front of a warm fire in a well-insulated log cabin. In any other circumstance, these sensations might be welcomed, but a seasoned mountaineer knows that this is actually one of the worst things you can feel. It means that death is creeping in, and your body is opening the front door and welcoming it. And if this stranger is causing that feeling, then one thing is certain. He's bad news. The explorer wants to turn and run, but he finds that he can't. It's almost as though he's frozen in place, entranced by the warm, inviting feeling that the other mountaineer seems to exude as he gets closer and closer. That's when the explorer notices something strange about him. Something is glowing through his goggles, like hot embers, burning a bright, luminous orange. Are those eyes? Dear God, are those his eyes? The explorer can feel their terrible stare, literally feel it. It hurts to be looked at by this monster. Yes, that's what it is. A monster in the shape of a man. Why are you here, mortal? Comes a booming voice from the inhuman mountaineer. Do you wish to challenge me? The explorer can't form words. He's quaking, his body acknowledging the cold that his mind can't, as those two glowing eyes bore into him. Speak, the stranger commands. Who? What are you? The explorer forces out between chattering teeth. The stranger laughs. I am the king of the mountain. Though to the SCP Foundation, he's better known as SCP-1529, and he's the worst possible thing you can run into while trying to scale Mount Everest. The explorer remembers his conversation with the old man in the tavern, the question he asked, "What will you say when you're face to face with the king?" And his own foolish answer, "I'll ask him for his crown." Now, really, truly face to face with the king of the mountain, all the poor terrified explorer can do is whimper and beg for mercy. "Please," he says, the tears freezing on his cheeks as they fall. "I just wanted to climb." The king of the mountain gives another booming laugh, his eyes burning. "Then you will climb," he says, "and climb, and climb, and climb." The king of the mountain must have wielded truly unspeakable power to do what he does next. With a simple nod, the explorer is suddenly hanging off the mountainside, his fingers digging into the craggy rocks. The only thing supporting his weight. It was like being back at square one all over again, except with added pain, terror, and cold so deep he can feel his bones rattling. And all the while, he feels those eyes upon him, those burning, fiery eyes, staring with absolute malice. He keeps climbing. Every time he reaches a plateau, a place where he might camp and find even momentary comfort, the king of the mountain is already waiting there, staring that horrible stare. And just like that, the explorer was climbing again, wind whipping against him like 40 lashes from a cat o' nine tails. That, coupled with the endless strain of the climb on his muscles, is the worst agony he's ever felt. And yet, he never dies. Even though he hasn't eaten in days, weeks, months, years, he never, ever dies. He just fulfills the same torturous loop over and over again. It's like the king of the mountain is just keeping him alive for his own amusement, a toy that's impossible to break. But while the explorer never breaks, as time goes on and the torments never cease, he does begin to change, like rock being molded by the tide. First, from the endless stress, his hair falls out. His skin goes pale from the lack of sun. His body becomes thin and wiry from starvation and malnourishment. The endless physical strain even warps his limbs. His arms and legs begin to stretch, his body becoming elongated and grotesque. All the way through this horrific, dehumanizing ordeal, the king of the mountain stares at him. One day, the explorer, now changed, reaches a plateau, and as can be expected, the king of the mountain stares at him with his burning eyes. The explorer cowers and covers his face with his hands, sobbing from exhaustion. He just wants the king of the mountain to look away, to leave him be. He babbles incoherently. He doesn't want to be seen anymore. His pain simply makes the king of the mountain laugh. "I gave you your wish," the mountain king says, his voice oozing with contempt. "You climbed, didn't you? You thought that your climbing would elevate you, make you more than human. But now, you're so much less. Our business concludes here. I'm tired of playing with you." And with that, the king is gone. The explorer is alone, stranded among the snow and the whipping winds of the death zone, but very much alive. He's finally able to go. At long last, after what felt like an eternity, he's escaped. When the explorer arrives in the village again, he's not the explorer at all. It's been years since he went missing on the mountain. The old man who had warned him not to go up onto Mount Everest had passed peacefully in the interim. The other members of his small village would not be afforded the same luxury. Instead, the explorer stumbled back through the village limits, still covering his face. The only sounds he can hear are the wailing wind and his own pitiful sobbing. Everything hurts. He's so terribly afraid. He needs somebody to help him. Why will nobody help him? The sun begins to rise, and the village shakes itself awake. People leave their homes to go about their daily tasks. None of them are expecting to see a monster loping through their streets, a pale, gangling monstrosity, stretched and hairless. It engenders a mix of fear and curiosity as it stumbles around, audibly sobbing with a loud, warped voice. It's like nothing any of them have ever seen before, like something out of a myth or a folk tale. But for the monster that was once the explorer, it's so much worse. At first, he thinks that the villagers might be there to help him, but then he sees their eyes, that same intense, burning fire pit orange as the king of the mountain, that same horrible gaze that the explorer thought he'd escaped when he'd left the mountain, the gaze that meant pain, torment, and madness. Even when he tries to cover his face, when he wails at them to go away in words that make sense to no one but him, he can still feel those terrible eyes on him. Is he still on the mountain? Is he still at the mercy of the Mountain King? Are these all just illusions or projections, another awful trick? What did he ever do to deserve this kind of torment? Was the crime of wanting to climb a damn mountain worth this kind of everlasting suffering? Did it earn him the gaze of all these monstrous eyes? The explorer begins to feel his anguish being replaced by another feeling, rapidly rising rage, the kind of pure, blistering hatred that inexorably leads to one result: violence. First, he screams, then they scream, and finally, the killing begins. The creature that had once been the explorer leaves no stone unturned. Even when they try to run away, he still feels their eyes on him. He needs to kill them all, to annihilate them quickly, leave no trace. It's the only way he can feel anything close to at peace again. It becomes a kind of terrible chain reaction. The sound of the horrors going on in the street only entices more to come outside and see what's going on, to look at the creature causing all this carnage, to see its face. They have no idea that this very action is dooming them. And within the hour, the village is empty, save for one creature, the creature that had once been the explorer, now just afraid, confused, and alone. He will always be alone. The anomaly that will soon be known as SCP-096 simply bows its head and weeps.
A child is sleeping happily in their bed, dreaming of Christmas morning. What they don't hear, as they sleep, is the sound of SCP-4666 slipping into their room. SCP-4666 watches the child for just a moment before reaching into a giant bag. Hi, I'm Dr. Bob, and this is SCP-4666, also known as the Yule Man. SCP-4666 is thought to be a single humanoid entity, but one that has been alive for an incredibly long time. Those who have come into contact with SCP-4666 and lived to tell the tale describe him as being very tall, between 2 and 2.3 meters. He also appears to be very old and very thin. He always appears without clothing, even when the weather is below freezing and would be much too cold for any normal human to survive. Though the true extent of his anomalous properties are still unknown, SCP-4666 seems to be able to travel instantaneously to any location on Earth above the 40th line of north latitude, and may actually be able to travel anywhere on the planet. Encounters with SCP-4666 have only been reported during a very specific time of year, a period of 12 nights running from the night of December 21st to the early morning hours of January 2nd. This period is known as SCP-4666's active phase, and the encounters with the anomalous humanoid creature have been termed Weissnacht events. During these events, SCP-4666 appears at family dwellings, all of which, so far, have a few things in common. 1. They are all isolated in rural areas. 2. They are in locations with snow that covers the area for the duration of the event. And 3. They are all home to a family with at least one child under the age of 8. In places that match all of those characteristics, Weissnacht events sometimes occur and always follow the same basic progression. During the first 7 nights, The children will report seeing a strange figure within the vicinity of the home. The entity will seem to be watching the home from a distance, such as from across a field or from the edge of a nearby forest. Some children have even reported waking up at night to find SCP-4666 watching them sleep through a window. On nights 8 through 11, other family members will report hearing the entity, such as footsteps on the roof or in the attic. A bad-smelling odor will also start to be noticed in the house, but no source of the smell is ever found. These strange occurrences will often lead the family to think their house may be haunted, or that they're being terrorized by a madman. Finally, on the 12th night, one of two scenarios can occur. In the first, which happens roughly 15% of the time, families will often report that they heard footsteps during the night inside of their house, but there is never any sign of forced entry like broken windows or doors. In the morning, the children will find crudely made toys at the foot of their beds. For the lucky ones, this is the end of the Weissnacht event for them. The roughly 85% who experience the other scenario are considerably less lucky. In the vast majority of cases, the 12th night is a horrible experience. SCP-4666 still enters the home on the final night, but rather than leave presents for the children, it incapacitates the family and moves them all into a single room, where it proceeds to kill them one by one in view of the rest of the family. The exact method of killing varies from event to event, but there's almost always an element of torture that occurs before they are finally killed, and this torture may serve a ritualistic purpose. The entire family is killed except for one of the children who is under the age of 8. This child is instead abducted and placed into a giant bag SCP-4666 carries with it. SCP-4666's existence was first noted in 1974 by the Foundation's then-new Anomalous Signature Recognition Program, which alerted the Foundation to several suspiciously similar home invasions and murders that occurred throughout the Northern Hemisphere on the night of January 1st. Further research uncovered evidence for what was most likely other Weissnacht events every single year, dating back all the way to the late 18th century, with there being, on average, a little more than 3 events per year. And there's even been evidence of references to what may be SCP-4666, dating all the way back to the 1st and 2nd century AD. Identical fingerprints have been found at all of the houses which match the conditions for Weissnacht events, and have been matched to a recovered partial print from all the way back in 1873. These fingerprints have characteristics that don't match any known human fingerprints, and the human-like white hairs that have also been recovered do not appear to contain human DNA, or any DNA at all for that matter. In the rare Weissnacht events where SCP-4666 does not murder the family and gifts are left behind, the gifts are anything but normal. The gifts, known as SCP-4666-As, appear to be made from the bodies of children that SCP-4666 abducted from other homes. In one case, from 2018, at the home of a family in Alaska, a life-size doll made from the body of a female child was left behind. The doll was wearing a dirty dress made from sewn-together rags that was in some places sewn directly to the skin. Her mouth had been sewn shut and painted red with human blood. Another child's fingernails had been glued over her own, and 3 fingers were missing completely. The scalp had also been replaced with another child's scalp and hair like a crude wig. Worst of all, both eyes had been removed and replaced with 2 stones which were painted to look like eyes. But most frightening of all was that the child who had been turned into a doll was somehow still alive. Authorities took the girl to a hospital where she was able to give a brief interview. She explained that the man who abducted her had killed her parents before putting her into a giant bag where there were other children too. SCP-4666 took the children somewhere deep below the earth in a cave system full of ice and bones. There, they were forced to make crude toys until they couldn't go on any longer, at which point they became toys. The girl, now known to be Ekaterina Morozova, had been abducted 2 years previously in a known Weissnacht event. She survived for only 18 hours after being discovered. An autopsy revealed many terrible injuries, and the cause of death was found to be from severe, sustained malnourishment. SCP-4666 has been classified as Keter and is currently not contained. The Foundation monitors web traffic and law enforcement channels for any evidence of SCP-4666 activity, and especially any potential Weissnacht events, such as cases of stalking reported during the 12-night active phase or other strange phenomena at houses with young children. Should a Weissnacht event be suspected to be in progress, the nearest containment task force is dispatched to attempt to contain SCP-4666 using the standard PDP-8 Humanoid First Contact protocols. So far, no such containment attempt has been successful. A kindly-looking old woman is carrying groceries into her home. When she closes the door, a crack forms in the wall, and a tile slides down off her roof, crashing to the ground and shattering. The next day, the local builder seems confused. He just fixed a similar problem a week ago at another house, and another the week before that. He'll patch this crack just like he did before and repair the roof, but as he does so, he can't help but think he'll be at another house with the same problem soon. Old people are like this sometimes, though, breaking things on purpose to get someone to come visit them. Oh well, as long as the money is right, he'll keep doing the repairs. That evening, the old woman is in bed when she's woken up by something falling onto her face. A crack is opened in the ceiling right above her bed, and plaster is falling on her. What is happening to this house? She would have to call the builder again in the morning and let him know that it was getting worse. She gets up to clean the plaster dust off her face, but stops halfway to the door. Was that a noise she heard? It sounded like it was coming from downstairs. Another noise. She definitely heard something. Is someone in her home? "Hello?" she cries out. "Whoever you are, you better go. My husband is going to be home any moment, and he won't be happy." The noises seem to have stopped. Maybe she was imagining things. Who would rob a poor old woman, after all? She didn't have anything worth taking. She still needs to wash the plaster off her face, though. She listens for a moment, and when she doesn't hear anything else, she opens the bedroom door and screams. The next day, a child stands in front of the house with a look of shock. Was there an earthquake? How could a house end up like this? They ring the doorbell, but there's no answer. They knock on the door and are surprised to find that the door is open. "Grandma?" the child cries into the quiet house. No response. The child enters and looks around. The house is a mess. Chunks of plaster have fallen off the walls and ceiling. Shelves have fallen over, spilling their contents. And there's broken glass from shattered light bulbs everywhere. The boy looks up the stairs and can see that his grandmother's bedroom door is open and the light is on. "Grandma, are you up there?" Still no response. The child nervously starts up the stairs, gripping the railing tight. They quietly make their way to the bedroom and step into the sliver of light coming from the cracked door. The child pushes the door open to find their grandmother on the floor. Only, it isn't their grandmother. Whatever this is looks like their grandmother, but like she has been stretched and twisted, her body bent at angles where no joints exist. The child is paralyzed with fear, unable to do anything but stare. But the nightmare isn't over yet, because their grandmother is still alive. Sadly, reports like these are all too common in this small town that is plagued by attacks from SCP-783, also known as the Crooked Man. SCP-783 is an extremely dangerous anomalous creature that is currently plaguing the population of Tembe, a small rural village in Oxfordshire, England. Every 12 years during the fall and winter months, SCP-783 will engage in a period of hostile behavior that lasts for roughly 70 days, during which time it will target and attack people who are indoors and alone after sunset. Those targeted by SCP-783 will find that the building they are in rapidly deteriorates, causing damage and creating structural integrity issues. These often appear as cracks on the outside of the building that lead to the buildings taking on a crooked appearance. Unfortunately, while the SCP Foundation is aware of both the location and the periods within which SCP-783 operates, it has so far been unable to prevent any attacks. Additionally, the Foundation has yet to be able to produce either an image or even a physical description of SCP-783 due to the effect it has on recording equipment. Cameras set up to capture the anomaly produce only distorted or corrupted footage, leaving its appearance a mystery. Victims targeted by SCP-783 meet a fate that is, in many ways, worse than death. Their bodies will experience extreme deformations, as their bones suffer dozens of fractures and are stretched and twisted in various unnatural directions. They are then healed by the rapid generation of cartilage and the growth of extra skin to cover the new elongated limbs, leaving the victims a malformed knot of gnarled extremities. Some of the cases are quite severe, with one victim having just their forearm extended to over 2.4 meters and another who was left stretched to 12.5 meters in height. Despite the gruesome injuries suffered, the majority of victims are still alive following the attacks, though they will more often than not be left completely paralyzed, in a persistent vegetative state, or both. 27 victims of SCP-783 are currently being held in a long-term care facility within a wing of a local hospital that was requisitioned by the Foundation specifically for the care and treatment of 783 victims. Like many of the anomalies that the SCP Foundation investigates and contains, many of the residents of Tembe appear to have some awareness of the Crooked Man, and the anomaly has become something of a local boogeyman. Researchers have even documented local school children singing a nursery rhyme that appears connected and may even explain the origins of the creature. It goes, "There lived a crooked man who made a crooked deal. He kept a crooked cane and his catch in crooked creel. He stole a crooked child who cried a crooked squeal, and that crooked little man was broken on the wheel." A month before a recent SCP-783 period of activity was to begin, a Class D personnel, D-209, was sent to live in a Foundation-owned home in the village. Audio and video recording equipment was set up throughout the house in case the D-Class was targeted, in the hopes that some information could be gleaned should something take place. 43 days after he began living in the house, something finally did. One evening while in bed reading a book, D-209 heard noises on the ground floor of the home. Cameras on the first floor experienced corruption and showed only a distortion moving through the house. When D-209 attempted to leave the bedroom and escape the home, they immediately encountered SCP-783. During a period of time that lasted roughly 5 hours, their bones were broken numerous times and reset over and over, leaving D-209 a twisted mass of flesh and bone. Strangely, at the exact same time that D-209 was being attacked, all 27 of the living prior SCP-783 victims in the hospital experienced violent seizures, despite most of them having been declared functionally brain dead and the rest being totally paralyzed. Also concurrent with the attack was a seismic event on the outskirts of town, and the details revealed by this event were both illuminating and extremely disturbing. Foundation personnel were dispatched to the site of the seismic activity to investigate and determine if it was connected to SCP-783 in any way. There, they found a small group of angry townspeople, perhaps frustrated by seemingly unending paranormal events in their town and the lack of progress that had been made to stop them. After a tense standoff, SCP Agent Collins fired her service weapon into the air, and the crowd quickly scattered. Now, free of distraction, the agents could begin their investigation in earnest. They immediately spotted several objects sticking out of the earth. Upon closer inspection, these were identified as elongated human toes. A dig team was sent to the site, and by the next day, a mass grave had been uncovered that was filled with the twisted mass of what appeared to be victims of SCP-783. Their mutated and drawn-out bodies were well preserved despite being buried directly in the ground, and had all been buried head down, with their arms extending deeper into the burial pit. As one researcher was attempting to take a tissue sample from one of the bodies, the ground beneath him gave way and he fell into the pit. He landed on the tangled mass of limbs which shifted under his weight, and he disappeared into the pit beneath them. Agent Collins immediately found a length of rope, tied it to her waist, and climbed into the pit with instructions to the on-site team to pull her back up when she signaled. Agent Collins descended into the pit beneath the bodies, and after several minutes, she was extracted, though without the missing researcher. At debriefing, she described how she found an anomalous location under the ground beneath 783's victims' corpses, and she was so rattled by what she saw that she was granted a temporary leave of absence. The Foundation had to know more, and a D-Class personnel was quickly selected for exploration of the underground anomaly. D-2172 was equipped with audio and video recording equipment, along with several scientific measurement tools, as well as a firearm, and was lowered down into the pit via crane. Their wired tether to the surface would both send the information they collected back, as well as serve as their lifeline to the surface. As D-2172 was lowered past the mass of corpses into the darkness, they experienced a sense of vertigo, before it was realized that the anomalous effects extended to gravity as well, which had become reversed, and that they would need to start climbing up in order to descend further into the pit. They soon climbed out of the hole surrounded by the reaching, extended arms of corpses, and emerged into an open world with an overcast sky. It looked exactly like the town of Tembe, with the same buildings present there as in our world. The world appeared to be uninhabited, though, with no sign of the missing SCP Foundation researcher. D-2172 began investigating the buildings and found them all to be empty as well, though they did unfortunately find signs of a struggle in one house, with what looked to be evidence of the missing researcher's demise. They continued exploring the area and found that the anomalous properties of the location extended to its borders too. And as the D-Class walked north out of the town, after several kilometers, they found that they were now somehow back at the southern edge of the town. D-2172 was ordered to return to the entry point, but as they walked, they were suddenly impeded by the deformed body of an SCP-783 victim that stretched across the road in front of them. D-2172 drew and fired their weapon at the entity, but it didn't react, and they were forced to retreat into the nearby woods. After several minutes, they stopped to rest when they spotted something else. In the distance, the D-Class saw what looked to be a giant white birch tree, and it was coming towards them. As the living tree approached, it became clear that it wasn't a tree at all. What looked like branches were extended bony fingers that it was using to walk. The long, branch-like fingers were coming out of the top of the tree, where D-2172 could see their origin. These branches were the elongated fingers of the missing SCP Foundation researcher. D-2172 turned to run as the giant living tree chased them back into the town, firing their weapon at the creature whenever they had the chance, but was unable to stop it. The visual feed was soon lost as the audio continued to broadcast the screams of D-2172. But this wasn't the end of the expedition. The on-site team was surprised to witness after several hours that the tether was pulled on twice, the signal that it should be reeled in. A medical team was sent to the site, since it was assumed that D-2172 would need immediate care, and the team began reeling in the line. After several minutes, they spotted the harness that should have been strapped to D-2172, but with nothing in it. They continued to pull, but the harness became stuck on the mass of corpses in the pit. They then noticed that it wasn't actually stuck. There was a hand holding onto the harness for dear life. It was D-2172's hand. The team kept pulling as D-2172's arm kept stretching out of the pit to a length of over 3 meters. But eventually, the resistance became too much. D-2172 lost its grip, and it was seen sinking back into the mass of corpses inside the pit. Following this expedition, it was determined that only special operations teams and mobile task forces would be used to explore the dangerous anomalous location in the future. At least 3 such expeditions have been undertaken, though the details remain classified for the time being, and perhaps it is for the best if they remain so. The SCP Foundation will continue to monitor the town of Tembe in an attempt to learn more about SCP-783 and hopefully discover a means to contain it and its related phenomena. Due to the difficulty in containing the anomaly, it has been classified as Keter, and a local building adjacent to the Tembe Hospital has been requisitioned and designated as Provisional Site 5 in order to accommodate the increased Foundation presence. As the SCP Foundation continues to research this mysterious and highly dangerous anomaly, any victims of SCP-783 are to be retrieved, their injuries catalogued, and then their bodies are to be incinerated.
Candace Hayes, we have thy confession. A witch as brazen as you shall be burned at the stake.
The crowd gathered in the small room bursts into a cheer as the judge hands down the sentence. The accused woman doesn't react, though. She looks neither scared nor afraid, but simply resigned to her fate. No time is to be wasted in carrying out the punishment that the judge has decreed. A pair of constables grab the woman by the arms and take her away. A mob follows along as the woman is led through the town, taunting and jeering, calling her a witch, a wife of Satan, and worse names. She doesn't seem affected by them, though. In fact, she looks as if she can't even see them. Her attention is focused solely on one mysterious woman who walks along with the crowd, and yet somehow seems disconnected, as if she isn't truly there either. The two women maintain eye contact as the constables keep pushing the condemned woman along. They lead the woman outside of town to a tall hill. The ropes binding the woman's hands are cut, and she has just a moment to rub her sore wrists before she is forced to the ground and lashed to a piece of wood as another group tosses the last logs onto a nearby pile. Once she is securely tied down, the constables step away, but then another man wearing a hood approaches. He carries a large club and without hesitation begins beating her legs. The woman's composure finally breaks and she cries in pain from the cracking of her bones. The crowd only cheers louder at the screams from the witch. The beating has left the woman's legs mangled, but this is far from over. The woman, still strapped to the wood, is placed on the pyre, where she hangs like a scarecrow above the combustible material. The judge steps forward out of the screaming mob, carrying a torch. He loudly exclaims that for her crimes, she will be burned until dead. But the judge doesn't step forward. He instead announces that another will have the honor of lighting the flame. Another man steps out of the crowd and takes the torch from the judge. He walks towards the pyre and looks up at the woman. She is exhausted from the beating, but she lifts her head. She doesn't look at the man with the torch, though. She's looking past him, locking eyes with the mysterious woman who walked along with the crowd. The man looks angry, slighted that she won't even meet his eyes in this final moment, and without another moment's hesitation, he tosses the torch onto the pyre. The wood lights instantly, the tinder combusting and turning into a huge roaring fire. The crowd also erupts into even louder cries of celebration as the woman screams from inside the blaze. The man watches as the woman is lost behind the fire and the smoke, and eventually, her cries too are hidden behind the crackles and pops of the flames. He doesn't move until the fire has nearly burned itself out. Most of the crowd has left at this point, having gone back to their homes, content with the role they played in doing the Lord's work. As the constables pull a charred torso down from the wood and unceremoniously toss it over a steep side of the hill, the man finally turns and starts to walk away, a tear rolling down his cheek. The judge approaches and places a hand on the man's shoulder. "There, the judge says, attempting to comfort the man. "You'll find a new wife soon enough." Hundreds of people were accused of witchcraft in colonial America, and while it is likely that many were falsely accused, there is reason to believe that some were under the influence of, or were themselves, what we now describe as anomalies. And SCP-3998 is just such an example, better known as the Wicker Witch Lives. SCP-3998 is a human cadaver which dates from the late 17th century that is covered in fourth-degree burns and is missing its legs. There is also evidence of extensive blunt force trauma, but it is not known if the beating or the burning was the ultimate cause of death. At some point, the remains were collected and fastened into a scarecrow that is held together with wicker, nails, and wire. While a scarecrow fashioned from a cadaver is rather unconventional, what brought SCP-3998 to the SCP Foundation's attention were its other anomalous attributes. It constantly secretes a flammable liquid from its bones that primarily consists of ethanol and human fat, and every night between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m., the corpse ignites. This fire doesn't cause any damage to the corpse, though, and it is unknown how it produces the flammable liquid or ignites. 3998 does not keep its flames to itself, though. It appears that the SCP targets those who have either killed or physically abused a romantic partner, causing them to catch fire as large quantities of boiling ethanol appear in their stomach. Their midsection will eventually melt and then explode, leading to amputation of the lower half of their body. The fire burns both incredibly hot and unnaturally fast, and is unable to be put out until SCP-3998 is extinguished. A number of historical documents related to the case have been discovered and made available to Foundation researchers that shed light on SCP-3998, including excerpts from a 17th century diary belonging to a woman who lived near where the cadaver was discovered. In the entries, the woman describes attending the wedding of her neighbors, Aidan and Candace Hayes, though Candace did not seem especially happy with the arrangement. Candace is characterized as someone who likes to keep to herself and who does not conform to the era's idea of a good wife. As a result, it appears that she became the victim of abuse at the hand of her husband. The diarist hypothesizes that Candace has brought this fate upon herself due to her behavior, which may stem from her being under the hold of the devil. In other words, the neighbor believes that Candace is a witch. Others must have had the same suspicion, because we also have records of Candace's interview with a Judge William Stoughton, who questioned her about the accusations of consorting with evil spirits. Candace readily admitted to this, though she disagreed that it was in any way evil. She told the judge that the rituals and magics she practiced were not inherently good or bad, and that anyone was capable of using the same tools. She went on to explain that she hated her husband, that she had been forced to marry him, and that he had been nothing but cruel and violent towards her. Candace also mentioned a name, Clovis, that the judge assumed to be the demon that she had made her cursed pact with. Candace appeared to offer no defense or excuses for her actions, and the judge sentenced her to die by burning at the stake, with her husband, Aidan, being the one to light the fire. The story of this witch trial was typical of the time, and that likely would have been the end of what we know about SCP-3998. But another historical document was located that has truly given a new perspective to this anomaly. A sealed letter found in the cellar of a home that is addressed to Candace, though it appears to have been written after her death. The letter is from her secret lover, and describes how they collected Candace's burnt bones from the bottom of the hill before binding them together with wicker and wire. The letter then describes how Candace's husband has recently restocked his own home with gin, which is well known to be extremely flammable. The letter ends with an affirmation of the writer's eternal love for Candace and is signed, Clovis. But perhaps the best information we have about the origin of SCP-3998 comes from an obscure local tale that was passed down orally for years and eventually documented on an urban legend website. The legend tells of a woman who promised her soul to a she-devil who taught her magic, but also offered companionship. When her husband found out, he contacted the local authorities and had the woman arrested. She was tried, her legs were broken, and she was hung up like a scarecrow before being burned alive. Her body was dumped off the side of a mountain, but the she-devil collected her bones and gave her life again. The need for revenge burned in the woman's heart, so in the middle of the night, she doused herself in her husband's gin, set herself on fire once more, and fell upon him as he slept, burning him alive so he could suffer the way that she did. SCP-3998 is currently held in a secure holding locker in Site-34 that is fireproofed and vacuum sealed to prevent it from igniting. Every morning at 9 a.m., 3998 and its locker are cleaned to remove the secretions of flammable liquid. D-Class personnel who have been convicted of domestic abuse crimes are to always be kept at the site to ensure that they are the targets of SCP-3998, which, when it's not allowed to ignite, will result in them only feeling mild discomfort in their head and chest rather than spontaneous combustion. Due to its relatively easy method of containment, SCP-3998 has been classified as safe. However, recent developments have caused the Foundation to rethink this classification. Despite 3998 being securely contained, the number of arson-related homicides in the state of Massachusetts have actually increased following containment, with many showing the same damage to their body as would be expected in a victim of SCP-3998. And while it may be that these are the result of a yet uncaught serial killer who simply happens to employ similar methods of killing their victims, a recent re-examination of the SCP-3998 corpse has revealed more troubling details. The body of SCP-3998 does not belong to Candace Hayes, and in fact appears to be a male who was in his 30s at the time of his death. Following these new revelations, reclassification of SCP-3998 to Euclid is pending. Whether SCP-3998 is the body of Candace's husband Aidan, forced to endure an eternal punishment of burning again each and every night, or if it's some other unfortunate victim of a violent and painful death, is unknown, as is the ultimate fate of Candace and Clovis. But with the deaths that would appear to be attributable to SCP-3998 showing no signs of stopping despite containment, it can only be assumed that the Wicker Witch lives.
It started with a woman. We'll call her Valerie. It doesn't matter whether or not that it's her real name, since her real name is lost, even to herself. Valerie was a young woman, but what many would describe as a very old soul. She'd been to strange places, seen awful things, and gotten in touch with some dangerous people. Like a lot of people with hard lives, Valerie tried to find relief wherever she could. Partying, gambling, buying herself expensive things. After all, she was here for a good time, not a long time, and she wanted to eke out any pleasure she could while she was still able. That's how she ended up in the high rollers section of a very exclusive private club in New York City. They had the finest drinks, the most attentive waitstaff, and the strangest entertainment. But that's the kind of exceptional service you can expect from a club run by one of the most powerful and influential clandestine enterprises in the world, Marshall, Carter & Dark Limited. Valerie had no idea who the club's owner was, though. She had come here with a wealthy friend. Well, calling them a friend might be pushing it. She was here with someone she had met earlier that night. But now, as she sipped her drink and played another hand of blackjack, she realized that he was nowhere to be seen. Oh well, she didn't have anybody to please but herself, and the clubs of Marshall, Carter, and Dark can provide plenty of pleasure, as long as you can pay. Valerie's problem was that she didn't have the money to keep living large off of their largesse, and she was about to get a rude awakening as to just how much these mysterious businessmen value their bottom line. If she took a second to think about it, she may have noticed she was out of place among the rest of the clientele. Wealthy businessmen and shady moguls in fine suits. What was a girl like her doing in a place like this? Unless, of course, she was here to fulfill another purpose entirely. Eventually, a bill was presented to Valerie. "Oh, this isn't for me," she told the waiter. "My friend is taking care of everything." When she went to motion towards the wealthy man who had brought her here, she realized that he was nowhere to be seen. "I'm afraid the gentleman I believe you're referring to left some time ago," the waiter told her. Valerie was disappointed, but this kind of thing had happened to her before. She reached for her purse. It looked like she'd be paying for herself that night. "All right, how much do I owe you?" she said as she grabbed a handful of chips from her stack. "I'm afraid you might be a little confused," the waiter told her, eyeing what at most could be a couple $100 in casino chips. "Are you not aware of what you're drinking?" Valerie glanced at the bottle of champagne sitting next to her, and then at the other two identical empty bottles sitting next to it. "It's the champagne he ordered," Valerie answered. "Yes," said the waiter, "but that isn't just any champagne." Valerie's eyes began to grow wide as he went on. "Those are from a very rare and very expensive vintage." "How rare?" Valerie nervously asked. "Extremely rare," the waiter told her. "Each bottle you were drinking cost..." It felt like the room suddenly filled with rushing water. The edges of her vision dimmed as a roar filled her ears as she heard the last thing the waiter said. Each bottle she had drank cost $20,000. When Valerie regained her senses, she was being escorted by a group of tall gentlemen in dark business suits into a soundproof back room, where they explained the severity of her situation. As the fear continued to set in, she started to beg. She said that if they just gave her a little more time, she could earn back the money she owed them. The solemn-faced representative explained to her that Marshall, Carter, and Dark Limited doesn't operate like that. However, there would be other ways that she could pay back her debt to them, but it would be their way. They gave a brief explanation that providing luxury private clubs to an esteemed clientele was only one part of their enterprise. The other side of their business was even more exclusive. An auction house where truly unique products are sold to the highest bidders. And come to think of it, there was a hole in the market that seemed to be just Valerie's size. All they asked for was for her to spend a period of time in their service, and when the debt was repaid, her life would be hers once more. And there was more to it as well. Although she would have to work for them, time would not actually pass for her during her service. She'd get to keep her youth. It would be as if she'd never worked for them at all, a blink of an eye, and she'd be right back where she was. Valerie took just a moment to consider it. She wasn't sure she believed what these men were telling her, but she'd heard and seen some very strange things in her life. Was this really so hard to believe? And after all, what choice did she have? She didn't have $60,000. So she agreed to repay her debt to Marshall, Carter, and Dark, and do whatever that entailed. The representatives assured her that all she'd need to do is lay back and relax. They'd take care of the rest. Valerie didn't remember much after that moment, but she awoke in the dark. She couldn't move any part of her body other than her eyes. The next time she saw the light, she remembered being up on stage, looking down at a crowd of people wielding auction paddles, while an animated auctioneer reeled off the many advantages of some product she couldn't see. Certain words and phrases stuck out. Fully articulated and posable, warm to the touch, not a blemish on her, Never talks back. She'll always look you right in the eye. Eventually, someone won, and she was placed back in the darkness. Years went by, being taken in and out of the dark by strangers, wearing different clothes and being referred to by different names, moving only when she was permitted. Little by little, she forgot the person that she once was. One day ran into the next. It all became a blur of darkness, punctuated by brief flashes of light. Years turned into decades. She never said a word. She forgot what it even felt like to be able to speak. But then one day, out of the darkness, appeared a pair of strangers in black tactical gear who looked at her with an expression somewhere in between pity and disgust. From that moment on, she finally found a new name to replace that empty void. Now, she was SCP-446. The files on SCP-446 are as mysterious as they are deeply disconcerting, and we can only speculate as to the exact process that led to the creation of SCP-446, since the duplicitous salesmen at Marshall, Carter & Dark Limited don't seem eager to share their secrets with anyone outside of their organization. But what SCP Foundation researchers have learned from solid empirical observation is that SCP-446 is a humanoid mannequin 1.75 meters tall and weighing 52.16 kilograms. She is, or perhaps was, a pale-skinned Caucasian woman who appears to be in her early 20s. She has brown hair that measures 17.78 centimeters at its longest point, brilliant, bright blue eyes, and the distinctive Marshall, Carter & Dark Limited logo tattooed on her lower back. In many ways, she has all the hallmarks of a living human being. She's superficially anatomically correct, with realistic skin tone and texture, eye coloration and sclera clarity, and researchers who've dealt with her directly claim that she has the warmth of a real human being. Despite seeming to be alive, though, SCP-446 doesn't respond to verbal communication, has no pulse or heartbeat, and she doesn't even appear to breathe. Whether SCP-446 can truly be considered alive is still an open question among Foundation researchers. SCP-446 is stored in the same hinged metal box she was found in, which is plain save for a series of clothing measurements for those wishing to purchase their own custom accessories. When Foundation field agents first discovered her, they attempted to sit her up. However, what they found was that she responded to their touch, sitting up on her own. All it took to get her to lay back down was a gentle push on her shoulders from the front. Through further study, it was discovered that selective touch cues can induce different types of movement in SCP-446. She could be induced to stand up on her own, and through gentle pressure applied to the top of the head, she could be induced to sit or lay back down on her own. You may have also noticed the somewhat uncanny quality of SCP-446's eyes. Please don't be alarmed. It isn't anything out of the ordinary. Her eyes will follow the nearest person to her around the room, and she'll try to make eye contact if possible. Don't let it bother you. Everyone gets used to it eventually. Her limbs can also be posed and manipulated as required, even into positions requiring balance, like standing on one leg. However, if pushed over, she will immediately lose balance and fall. It seems almost as though her actions are defined as much by the toucher's intent as the touch itself. Essentially out of any more ways to learn about SCP-446, an in-depth medical examination was authorized. Given the humanoid nature of 446, the doctor conducting the examination decided to proceed in a manner similar to the kinds of autopsies given to non-anomalous human corpses. The doctor noted being disturbed by the fact that 446's eyes kept following them, even as they prepared the tools for the autopsy. They also remarked on the almost freakish clearness of the subject's skin. There wasn't a single detectable mark or blemish, almost like a porcelain doll. There was no rigor or livor mortis, nor any signs of damage or injury to the body. Examination of the mouth revealed an obstruction at the top of the throat, a metal plate fixed to the back of her mouth, bonded to the flesh on all sides. The plate shifts slightly when touched, but couldn't be removed. Similar plates had been installed in the ear canals, nostrils, and all other body orifices, as if to ensure that nothing can enter or exit 446's body. The doctor then moved on to the internal examination of SCP-446, beginning with a number of X-rays. These revealed several irregularly shaped masses inside 446's body, covering major organs such as the heart, brain, kidneys, and liver. Dissection revealed these masses to be boxes of various shapes and sizes, constructed from the same metal that comprises the obstructive plates. These boxes are connected to the corresponding organs through a series of wires and tubes. The doctor notes that neither their scalpel nor their wire saw could cause any meaningful damage to the boxes, and that it's possible the boxes not only keep the body preserved, but also allow for its limited set of movements. Certain barriers presented themselves during the dissection process, both physical and psychological. SCP-446 exhibited an extraordinary healing factor, fully repairing her own skin minutes after having her chest fully opened in a Y incision. This made sustained internal observation difficult, and the doctor declined to perform any more extensive mutilations for fear that the damage would be irreparable. This limited the progress that could be made in the procedures overall. However, it wasn't the worst thing to occur during the dissection. The doctor noted that SCP-446 stared at them the entire time while they were making incisions into the body, making them extremely uncomfortable. And during the several-minute healing process of the Y incision in her chest, SCP-446's mouth moved, as if speaking silently the entire time. The doctor left a note that this may suggest a level of sapience in 446, though nothing could be proved conclusively on that front. The file for SCP-446 is a relatively sparse one, given the minimal containment requirements of the anomaly. Between studies, she is simply kept in her box. There has, however, been one notable incident involving SCP-446, documented by Foundation researcher Dr. Sunderland back in 2010. The event, labeled Incident 446-1, took place in Storage Room 6. In the interest of preserving the anomaly's modesty, she was dressed in a standard D-Class uniform before being placed back into her box for the night. A guard reported a strange thumping noise later that evening and investigated himself and found it was coming from the inside of SCP-446's box. Dr. Sunderland was called in at this point and oversaw the opening of the box. It turned out that SCP-446 was repeatedly attempting to rise to a sitting pose inside the box and was banging her head against the lid. Finally freed, SCP-446 rose to her feet of her own volition for the first time since the start of her containment. She assumed a strange pose, her head bowed and her wrists touching above her head, as though her hands were bound at the wrists, or she was desperately praying or begging. Her facial expression also shifted for the first time, taking on a look of sadness and fear. Dr. Sunderland was able to make SCP-446 return to a more neutral standing position, but nothing could make her permanently assume the laying position again until the D-Class uniform was once again removed. There is still not a confirmed explanation as to why exactly this happened, but the answers may be too horrible to even consider. For this particular anomaly, which has been given the Safe Class designation, perhaps the kindest thing to do is leave her in the box. That's at least a more humane fate than whatever Marshall, Carter, and Dark had planned.
The old house sits, crooked and dilapidated, on the very end of the last street in town. It's the kind of house that children share stories about and warn each other to stay away from. There isn't even any graffiti on it, rare for an abandoned building in this town. But nobody is brave enough to get close to it and risk their life if the rumors of its history are to be believed. A black van containing 4 men pulls up along the curb outside the house. One of them has been black-bagged, zip ties cutting into the skin of his wrists. He was leaving a bar in town when suddenly he found the barrel of a 9mm semi-automatic pistol looking him in the eye, held by a man with every reason to pull the trigger. 2 other men had then emerged from the dark behind him. There was a brief feeling of cold metal against his skin as the twin metal barbs of the stun gun were jammed into the man's neck. His body then began to convulse as 50,000 volts of electricity ran through his body, and when he was finally able to open his eyes again, there was only darkness. The back doors of the van swing open, and the unfortunate man is pulled out by 2 of his captors. The driver joins to help drag the man down the gravel pathway up to the deserted house's front door. In his desperation, he offers any excuse he thinks might save him. "Please, I just need a little more time. I can get the money, I swear. I've got another job lined up, honest. I start on Monday, just a little longer, I'm begging you." All he receives is silence as he's taken into the old house. There's no pleading, begging cliché that they haven't heard before. They've learned to just tune it out and get the job done. Click, click, click. The 3 men turn on their flashlights. The electricity hasn't been on in the uninhabited house for years. It's the domain of rats, roaches, and spiders now. The only evidence of life being the network of spiderwebs in every corner and the faint chittering sound of something coming from behind faded wallpaper. The only reason anyone would ever choose to come here is when you needed to do something under the absolute cover of dark, which is exactly what they needed to do. The dark-suited men drop their weeping prisoner to the ground. He tries again to plead with them and receives a hard kick in the gut. It knocks the breath out of the man, and he is left wheezing in quiet pain, no longer able to speak. One of them finally pulls the dark bag from his head.
His nose is bleeding. His eyes are equal parts bleary and afraid, like he only half understands his circumstances. What he does understand, though, is that it's looking increasingly unlikely that he'll be leaving this house tonight. The three men look down at the pathetic figure huddled on the floorboards. None of them really want to be here, but this is the job they've been paid to do. They are unaware, though, that they aren't the only ones watching. Somewhere in the dark is someone else who watches them with a detached, almost amused curiosity. Taking in the deep dark of the house, one of the men wonders aloud whether it might be haunted. The man with the gun laughs as he pulls back the hammer on his gun and tells him that there's about to be one more ghost here. But just as he is about to pull the trigger and put an end to their captor's terrified blubbering, he suddenly hears something that gives him pause. Something from above them, upstairs. Is he imagining it? Or are those particles of dust floating down from the ceiling, accompanied by the sound of footsteps? All of the men clearly hear it, and the three look around, shining their flashlights into the dark corners of the room. The one holding the man at gunpoint motions to one of the others to go check upstairs. He looks like he'd rather do anything else, but when the man with the gun, who is clearly the one in charge, turns and points his gun at him instead, the man finally concedes that he'll go check it out. He draws a gun of his own from inside his pocket and starts making his way up the creaking stairs to the second floor of the house. The leader's mind is still on whatever's upstairs. His dumb lackey tried filling his head with all those goofy ghost stories, but he knows, deep down, it's probably just a raccoon or something. When his driver has ensured there are no other witnesses, he'll finish the job, and they can all get out of this creepy dump. He calls up to the driver and asks him if he sees anything up there. "Nothing," he calls down. "I think we're—" His words are cut off by his own sudden scream. There are two gunshots, followed by a loud thump as something heavy hits the ground. The two men, both with guns out, crouch down in defensive poses. They call out again, asking what's happening, but they're only met with cold, unforgiving silence. Everyone is on high alert now. Even the bound man is now more afraid of whatever's upstairs than the men who brought him here. Nobody dares move as, after what feels like minutes of silence, the footsteps resume upstairs again. The leader calls out again, asking what's going on. Still no reply, just more footsteps. They follow the sound across the floor above them to the stairs, then listen as the steps start to creak again. Their eyes drift over where they see nothing. Are they going insane? The two hired guns share a panicked glance, as if to say, "What do we do now?" But neither has an answer. A quiet, reedy whisper suddenly echoes through the stale air of the house. With what sounds like a female voice, it rasps, "What are you doing in my house?" The remaining lackey, consumed by panic, begins firing wildly into the dark. The captive and the leader both get as close as they can to the floor as bullets fly through the air, piercing the old wooden walls, causing roaches alike to scatter. Soon enough, the bullets are gone, replaced with only the feeble click, click, click of his dry firing. "What is going on in here?" he thinks. "This place really is haunted." Before another fearful thought can cross his mind, a lamp comes flying at him out of the darkness, shattering into pieces of skin-carving ceramic against his face. Next comes a book, then an old heavy phone, and then a dusty old brick that strikes his skull with a monstrous crunch. He drops to his knees, bleeding from both nostrils and the deep gash cut into his forehead, before flopping face down onto the floor. He'll be lucky if he ever wakes up. Only the leader and his prisoner are left now, both confused, both afraid, both seemingly beset by a poltergeist. Suddenly, the leader feels a hot breath on his neck and a whisper right into his ear. "You shouldn't have come here," it hisses. He turns, screams, and fires once into the dark. Nothing. A strange, tinny giggle suddenly loops around him. It's everywhere and nowhere. He can hear footsteps, but where are they coming from? They're simultaneously getting further and getting closer. An unseen fist collides with his jaw, harder than he's been hit in a long time. He stumbles, looking around for the assailant, panting like a prizefighter in the championship rounds. But there's nothing there. There's nothing. Crack! It strikes the other side of his face. Another giggle from the dark. He spits a tooth out as his mouth bleeds. Not knowing what else to do, he extends his arm and fires desperately. Maybe he'll get lucky. Or maybe not. A force wraps itself around his extended arm and pulls on it with a sudden immense pressure. It snaps before he has the chance to scream, his arm bending at the joint in the wrong direction. He lets out an agonized cry as he drops his gun to the ground. But that scream is cut off when he takes a punch to the solar plexus, sapping the wind from him as he spews out a thin mist of blood that settles onto the shape of a woman's face, staring right at him, grinning. His terror and pain overcome him. His mind snaps and he faints from panic, collapsing to the ground in a heap. His jacket opens as invisible fingers work a handkerchief from an inside pocket and wipe the blood from the floating face, leaving only a floating, bloody handkerchief. The man on the ground, the one who was brought here against his will, watches astonished and speechless as the handkerchief flutters down to the ground. All he can do is stare in amazement as the leader's arm flops limply upright, as the gold watch around his wrist unclasps itself and floats into the air, and then, with a strange gulping noise, disappears entirely. Footsteps creak across the ground, the front door opens, then closes again, leaving the terrified man in silence, lying on the floor between two bodies. After a time, he finally gains the courage to stand up. He creeps nervously towards the front door and opens it. There's no one outside. Not that he could see whatever assailant just took out the group of men anyway. With one last look back into the dark house, he steps out and closes the door behind him. He's free, and no matter how hard he tries, he will never understand the true nature of the invisible specter that just saved his life. But while none of the men will never know what they encountered that night, the SCP Foundation certainly does, because these are the kind of antics you can expect from SCP-347, also known by the somewhat obvious nickname of the Invisible Woman. But she has another name, her own self-chosen epithet: Claudia. Foundation staff are currently unsure whether this is the real name of the SCP-347 entity or a pseudonymized reference to Claude Rains, the English actor who portrayed Dr. Jack Griffin in the 1933 film The Invisible Man. Of course, nothing is really as it seems when it comes to this particular anomaly, though it's easy to be more than what meets the eye when nothing meets the eye at all. Claudia, as I will refer to her both out of respect for her chosen name as well as for the sake of simplicity, is 164 centimeters in height and 55 kilograms in weight. And that's really all that is known for sure about her, because her primary anomalous trait is, of course, that she is completely and utterly invisible. Although she seems to possess them like an average human, all parts of her body, including blood and hair, will remain invisible even if removed from her body. It seems that only saliva and bodily waste become visible when separated from her body, as a number of disgruntled, mop-and-bucket-wielding D-classes are more than aware. Claudia is able to see through what also must be anomalous means, since in typical humans, the cones and rods of the eyes must be visible for them to receive light and thus see. Research is ongoing as to how exactly this is possible, as well as what it could potentially provide for active camouflage technology. By her own description, which due to her skittish and crafty personality must be taken with a grain of salt, Claudia is a mixed-race woman between the ages of 19 and 25, with brown eyes and wavy black hair. She appears to have no anomalous traits other than her invisibility, no super strength or speed, no ability to fly. However, what she does have is a very particular set of skills that make her a nightmare to anyone wishing to keep her under lock and key, like, for example, the SCP Foundation. The Foundation quickly learned that Claudia is an accomplished escape and infiltration artist, with the lock-picking skills of a veteran thief. She's able to move while making very little noise, which complements her natural stealth advantages perfectly, allowing her to get in and out of secured areas easily. These are skills she's developed not only to survive, but to support certain psychological dependencies she suffers from. While Foundation psychologists have posited a number of mental conditions that could be affecting Claudia, two seem to have risen to prominence: kleptomania and pica. Claudia appears to be compulsively driven to steal as a kind of psychological crutch. Being invisible, naturally, makes her an impeccable thief. However, when she has obtained the item of her desire, said item floating through the air is likely to draw unwanted attention. That is where her second strange habit comes in. Pica is an eating disorder that causes sufferers to consume items that are not food, sometimes damaging themselves in the process. Claudia has developed the unhealthy habit of swallowing some of the smaller items she steals, causing them to seemingly disappear until she later vomits the items back up. When interviewed on the matter, Claudia stated that she'd gotten the idea from watching Stevie Starr perform on a late-night television show. Starr is a Scottish performer known for his ability to swallow and regurgitate items, though Starr's ability doesn't extend far enough to meet the Foundation's threshold for anomalous. Before she was brought into containment, Claudia had a preference for abandoned houses. The home where Foundation agents finally discovered her was one with a long history of reported poltergeist activity. As is standard in instances where spectral phenomena were suspected, the Foundation moved in with infrared cameras, allowing them to quickly detect the humanoid shape of Claudia and move in to intercept her. Without the advantage of her invisibility, she had no chance of either evading or besting trained Foundation operatives in combat. Thankfully, it didn't need to come to that, and after a brief period of deliberation, Claudia gave herself up to the Foundation willingly in exchange for shelter and warm meals, both of which would be provided for her in containment. Prior to this, it's believed that she was effectively homeless for years and had been making ends meet in any way she could. She refuses to discuss her past directly, though a long string of ghost activity across the area and at least 2 deaths have been solidly linked to her activities. Being unseen for years of her life has taken an undeniable mental toll on Claudia, the isolation leading to instability and even violent outbursts on occasion. Thankfully, she has responded well to treatment from Foundation counselors and psychiatrists, which has reduced the frequency of these violent outbursts significantly. As she recovers further from her traumatic past, there is hope that Claudia may even begin to recover from her kleptomaniac tendencies altogether, allowing her to live a normal, well-adjusted life, or as much as one can hope to live while still remaining invisible. There's even more good news, though. Since entering containment and undergoing recovery, Claudia has become much more social. She enjoys interacting with other people, especially when they treat her as though she's an average person, and some of her actions have even been described as bordering on flirtatious. She enjoys interacting physically with people, and often plays impish pranks on the unsuspecting people sent into her chamber, such as rearranging or taking items to confuse them. She also shows, for unknown reasons, a particular fondness for interacting with people as they sleep, often touching and stroking them, though it may have been one of the only ways she was able to have human contact prior to entering Foundation custody. While she describes this as feeling right, those who experience it from the other side describe it as feeling unnerving, as though they've been touched by a ghost. Naturally, due to being an intelligent escape artist that is impossible to see through conventional means, Foundation containment specialists have needed to go all out on her containment measures, both to keep her contained and to keep her comfortable enough that she has no desire to attempt a containment breach. She is kept in a 5-meter by 5-meter room in Site-17, constantly monitored by a remote infrared camera, and in addition to infrared detection systems, Claudia is also visible in ultraviolet light, expanding the Foundation's means of seeing her. Her room has an ensuite bathroom with a shower and bathtub, and is furnished with a queen-sized bed, several oversized beanbag chairs, 2 armchairs, a desk and swivel chair, several bookcases, and a TV with a DVD player. The bookcases are filled with various books, primarily adventure novels, Harlequin romances, and art books. She's allowed DVDs of various movies and TV shows predating her arrival at the SCP facility, and may request new material to be reviewed every so often. Claudia is given access to any clothes she pleases, though she often prefers to remain unclothed to take advantage of her full invisibility. She does on occasion wear wigs and makeup for her own amusement. Her room must remain locked at all times when she is inside it, and 2 guards are required to check the door for any signs of tampering every hour. The door is only unlocked to allow staff members in and out of the containment chamber for the purposes of research and enrichment. Claudia enjoys chatting with staff members who bring her food, though said staff members are discouraged from forming attachments that are too close to Claudia, as it may allow her to manipulate them into helping her escape or gain special privileges. On the rare occasions when Claudia is allowed to leave the room, she is mandated to wear gloves and a layer of grease paint over her face to give personnel awareness of her hands and facial expressions. If she does attempt violent action or escape, she must be apprehended immediately and placed back into her room. In the event of an escape, infrared goggles will be distributed to all personnel, and any strange phenomena around Site-17 will be reported. Thankfully, escape attempts are quite infrequent, and while she currently has the Euclid Object class, pending further therapy, her containment class may be upgraded to Safe class. Of course, the Foundation keeps any containment breaches close to the chest, and if there was a recent containment breach, you'd have no way of knowing. For all you know, she could be watching you right now. So sleep tight, and if you feel someone stroking your hair in the night, be sure to check up on your valuables in the morning.
A young woman is spending the morning in town, completing a few errands she's been meaning to get to for a while. She picks up a few items from the supermarket, gets the cracked screen on her smartphone repaired, and decides to treat herself to a Danish from a local bakery. It's a relatively idyllic Tuesday, until she turns the corner into a narrow side street and sees them.
It can often be a little disconcerting to suddenly find yourself staring at a crowd that is gathered for seemingly no reason, but something about this one makes her particularly nervous, and she quickly realizes why. Each person in the tightly packed together group is grinning, as if they are all in on a particularly cruel joke about her. At face value, they all seem to be very different people, a collage of ages, races, genders, in different clothes with different styles, and yet they're all walking with perfect synchronicity, one perfectly timed footfall at a time. This is enough to seriously creep her out. Whatever this strange group of people is doing, she wants no part of it. Instead, she turns and heads in the opposite direction, fast walking and stealing discreet but frequent glances over her shoulder. She can't help but notice, even when the crowd exits the small side street, that they remain huddled together, like security guards packed tight around some invisible VIP. And even worse, they seem to be following her trajectory, getting faster, getting closer, still perfectly in sync with one another. How are all these people gaining so fast? She thinks to herself. When she's around a corner and out of sight, she does the sensible thing and breaks into a sprint, eager to put some distance between herself and them. Even though they haven't shown any signs of overt aggression, she can tell on some visceral level that they mean her great harm. She knows if ever they get close enough, within grasping distance, something terrible will happen. She's soon back at her home and locks herself in, bolting the door behind her. She breathes a sigh, but she's not relieved, not really. Maybe she's paranoid, but she feels like she isn't out of the woods just yet. Those eerie smiles, those perfect footsteps, she can't get them out of her mind. She slips into her kitchen and slides a knife out of the block. She tells herself that doing this is a little crazy, but having some kind of weapon in hand makes her feel at least a little bit safer. But whatever the feelings of comfort the knife gives her are shattered when she hears the doorbell ring. She hadn't ordered anything. She wasn't expecting anyone. Who could that be? She hides the knife behind her back and makes her way towards the door. Ding dong, it rings again. Whoever is on the other side is getting impatient. She opens the door slightly, but leaves the chain in place. There's a smiling man in a business suit on the other side. She's racking her brain, trying to remember. Is he one of the people from the crowd? Or is she just imagining things because she's freaked out? She can't tell anymore. She can feel her palm getting sweaty around the knife's handle. The man at the door clears his throat and says, "Excuse me, ma'am, I won't take up too much of your time, but I wanted to ask, have you heard the good word?" She shakes her head and tells the stranger that she isn't interested in hearing his pitch, but he just keeps smiling and presses on. Do you ever feel lonely, dissatisfied, unfulfilled? Don't you ever wish that you could become a part of something bigger than yourself? It'd be a real weight off your shoulders. She's starting to run out of polite ways to deny him when she hears a faint tapping against the nearby glass. The young woman turns her head and looks into her living room. There's a smiling woman standing at the window, rapping on the glass with her knuckles, grinning. The chill sets in immediately. She recognizes that face with absolute certainty. It's one of the people from the crowd, and now she knows for sure that the man at the door is too. But when she turns back to him, all she sees is his hand reaching through the gap in the door for her. She screams and backs away, instinctively slashing the knife at him. 2 fingers fall to the floor, but there's no blood, just thick, flesh-colored pus dripping from the 2 stumps. The hand doesn't even flinch. It keeps reaching, and soon the gap in the door is crowded with the faces of even more grinning human figures. She turns and runs as the sheer collected momentum of the crowd forces open the door. They spill into the hallway, tumbling over each other, but still smiling. She notices something trailing out of their clothes, long, sinewy ropes that look like they're made of living flesh, wriggling and pumping. With each passing second, this whole situation seems to just be getting worse and worse. Thinking quickly, she decides to flee up the stairs. If she gets to her bedroom fast enough, she can lock her door from the inside, open the window, and climb down the trellis into the yard before they can break in. In that moment, it seems like the best course of action, but only because she has no idea just how quickly the crowd can close the distance. In an instant, the crowd is up onto the stairs and following her, extending their grasping hands in unison. Who are these people? Why are they doing this? The questions that flood her mind are soon forced out by the shock of the grinning stranger in the business suit, pulling her into a powerful bear hug. He squeezes hard, and she can feel it in her muscles and bones. She wriggles for her life, but she can't resist his strength. The rest of the crowd reaches for her. She spots those awful fleshy cords again, emerging from the backs of all these terrifying strangers. And now she sees what they're all leading back to, a giant, formless blob of flesh, like some corrupted unknown organ, a huge monstrous tumor. It pulses and throbs. Just looking at it makes her want to be sick, and she can feel the most horrible energy coming off of it. Whatever this thing is, it wants her. It's reaching for her. Fight or flight kicks in, and this time flight isn't an option. The stranger in the suit has a good grip on her, in spite of his missing fingers, but she's still got the knife. She can see the cord trailing from his back into the giant flesh blob, and with one decisive strike, she severs it with the kitchen knife. Immediately, the man in the suit lets go of her. Both ends of the cord flop down, spraying more of the flesh-colored pus, but the effect on the man himself is even more drastic. He flails around, making the most horrible guttural gurgling noises she's ever heard. He heaves and vomits out gallons of the pus. It sprays from his eyes and nose like a fire hose. It oozes down and out of his pant legs. His body deflates like a punctured balloon as the awful substance cascades out of him, until all that's left is a wet, vacant sack of skin and clothes, quivering on the floor. But she doesn't have time to dwell on the horrors she's just witnessed. She needs to get out of here, now. She turns and continues running up the stairs as the crowd regroups and begins chasing her. She can hear their perfectly synchronized footsteps sloshing through the liquids of their fallen member. They've barely even slowed down. She keeps running. She just needs to keep running. A number of hands close around her body. Several of them clamp around her wrist, squeezing tight until the knife falls from her hand and clatters to the ground. They've learned already. The crowd rises up and closes around her. No matter how hard she struggles, they won't budge. They just keep huddling in. She can hear the giant pulsing mass of flesh closing in behind her. She feels one of those long, fleshy cords slithering up her back, its fibrous strands easing their way into her flesh until the connection is made. Her eyes roll up into her head as it pumps the fluid into her body, melting away everything inside and congealing it into the same nightmarish slop that she'd just seen splattering out of the man in the business suit moments ago. Little by little, everything that was once her is hollowed out, filled in, and painted over. Once the transformation is complete, she smiles, just like all the others. But she's not she anymore. She's just another part of it, its newest addition, a replacement for the man in the suit. The crowd leaves shortly after, keeping perfect step, looking for some new friends. At some point, everyone has felt the desire to fit in, but one anomaly takes the desire to join the throng to its ultimate extreme. This is SCP-428, also known as The Crowd. In its purest state, SCP-428 is an amorphous mass of flesh connected to a number of human hosts with organic tendrils, similar to umbilical cords. The central mass is obscured by its multiple human hosts, numbering 14 at the present moment, and it is an extremely dangerous entity. Once an individual is assimilated into its mass, they are to be considered lost. Upon assimilation, all of the victim's complex internal structures, bones, musculature, organs, nervous system, are instead replaced by material similar in composition to the amorphous mass that controls them. All that remains is their skin and vague shape, being piloted by the SCP-428 hub. When not actively seeking new victims to assimilate, SCP-428 enters a dormant state, its assimilated victims standing in a circle around the hub, audibly mumbling to one another and swaying gently. SCP-428 and its crowd will enter a hostile state if anyone travels within 2 meters of it. With surprising speed and ferocity, members of the crowd will try to mob the unfortunate victim in a sudden ambush, bringing them into the proximity of the hub. If they remain in this state for over 10 seconds, a cord will attach to their body and their vital systems will be replaced, and they will be assimilated into the crowd, just like the other victims of SCP-428 were before them. If, however, the victim somehow manages to escape before the process is complete, this will not be the end of their ordeal. Should someone evade its attention, SCP-428 and the crowd will enter a period of active hunting behavior to seek out the escaping victim. Failing that, they will try to assimilate any human wandering into their vicinity. There is no safe way to approach SCP-428 or any of its members under any circumstances. To do so is to court a fate worse than death. When a victim is assimilated, SCP-428 and the crowd will return to a dormant state until another victim presents itself. Foundation studies have determined that SCP-428 seeks to add at least one person to its crowd every month, and if a person is not provided, then it will engage in hunting behavior, putting everyone in the area in grave danger. SCP-428 isn't controlling a gaggle of mindless zombies, though. It is an extremely intelligent hive mind, made all the more frightening by the fact that it absorbs the knowledge, memories, and skills of each of its victims, and can reapply them through any of the others. Because of this, it appears to have incredibly adept knowledge of the human mind, and will happily resort to using tactics of psychological manipulation to gain an advantage. Despite being a large crowd, tests have shown that SCP-428 and its assimilated victims can move terrifyingly fast. This is because, due to the very nature of the perfectly attuned hive mind, they can walk or run in perfect synchronicity. To best understand this, picture a centipede skittering at great speed across a wall. So many legs, but all sharing a perfectly coordinated nervous system, working together to move the creature with military precision. Even individually, each member of the crowd is a formidable foe. Once they become part of SCP-428, they exhibit greatly increased strength. They show no signs of feeling pain, and also have the ability to quickly heal any injuries. Wounds also do not seem to impede function whatsoever. A member of the crowd getting shot in the leg won't slow it down in the slightest. However, while this creature is incredibly intelligent and dangerous, the same can be said for the SCP Foundation, and in the time since they discovered it, they have ascertained a few weaknesses, even though some of this knowledge came at a heavy cost. Though members of the crowd appear significantly resistant to damage, the SCP-428 hub itself appears to be vulnerable to attack and more than capable of feeling pain. If the hub is damaged in a manner that would cause pain, every member of the crowd is able to feel it, often collapsing and writhing around in agony. When the creature collects itself, it will retreat, guarded by its human shields. The Foundation has used this method to corral the creature back into containment during breaches, with the controlled applications of fire or electricity being favorite methods of Foundation security forces. Severing the connection between a member of the crowd and the central hub is also a surefire way to weaken the overall ability of SCP-428. A severed crowd member will immediately collapse, the SCP-428 material inside it liquefying and excreting from every orifice. This may intensify SCP-428's drive to discover a new victim, but it can also be used as a method of population control for the crowd itself. There has been one major incident concerning SCP-428 since its containment at the SCP Foundation, and it acted as a painful reminder to all staff that one should never underestimate the abilities of the anomalies they contain. Evidently, one of the people assimilated by SCP-428 in the past was skilled in the art of lockpicking, as SCP-428 had absorbed this skill. It took apart one of its members' belts and used the pieces to pick the lock of its containment chamber from the inside. It then positioned one of its female victims, crouching just outside the door, the cord slithering through the crack in the door behind her. She fell to her knees and began to weep loudly, attracting the attention of a nearby researcher. Naturally, when you hear a distressed person crying, it's human instinct to go investigate and help, and this particular researcher hadn't been briefed on the nature and abilities of SCP-428, which left him completely unprepared for the horrifying fate that awaited him. As he leaned in to comfort the crying woman, the rest of the crowd immediately emerged from the containment chamber's door, mobbing him. One forced its hand over his mouth, stifling his frightened scream as he was pulled in and quickly assimilated. While SCP-428 could pick locks, absorbing a member of SCP Foundation staff, both giving it access to the Foundation site layouts and inner workings, as well as a presentable frontman to assuage suspicion, was like getting its fleshy tendrils on a kind of master key. SCP-428 and its crowd, with the assimilated researcher at the head, progressed through the building, avoiding key security checkpoints and absorbing several other researchers and guards along the way. This was a particularly frightening development, as it allowed SCP-428 to further expand both its knowledge of the SCP Foundation and its skills in everything from science to armed and hand-to-hand combat. With every new person it took in, it grew significantly stronger and more dangerous to Foundation personnel. Thankfully, it drew the right kind of attention before it had a chance to escape the containment site proper. A mobile task force was dispatched to contain SCP-428 and the crowd and force it back into its containment chamber. However, being an extremely persistent creature, this minor setback didn't do anything to quell its desire to escape. Given that several members of its crowd were now ex-Foundation staff members, it tried to leverage this in order to manipulate the people guarding its chamber. This became such a problem that a researcher appended a note to its file, reading, "People, these casualties are gone. They are SCP-428 now. No matter what it might say or do, they are not your work colleagues nor your friends anymore. Remember this, it may save your life. SCP-428 and its crowd is currently contained in a 5 meter by 5 meter by 5 meter cell, with walls electrified to 30,000 volts to discourage attempts by members of the crowd to break or climb them. The cell is accessed via an airlock, and entry is restricted to Level 3 researchers and below, while escorted by 2 armed guards in order to eliminate the risk of SCP-428 absorbing a valuable asset to the SCP Foundation and coming into possession of truly catastrophic knowledge and skills as a result. Just imagine the disastrous results if, say, a member of the O5 Council were suddenly a part of SCP-428. Researchers are to remain a minimum of 2 meters away at all times, and it is mandatory for at least 2 armed guards to stay posted at the chamber's entrance at all times. SCP-428 is to be given 1 member of D-Class personnel to assimilate every single month in order to prevent it from engaging in hunting behavior. Due to SCP-428's frightening ability to absorb memories, skills, and intelligence, all D-classes given to 428 are screened for low intelligence and a lack of valuable skills to ensure that the anomaly isn't being given any new aces up its sleeves. However, continually giving SCP-428 new victims is going to increase its overall size and thus necessitate gradual containment upgrades. The possibility of permanently neutralizing SCP-428 is being explored, but in the meantime, it has been given the Euclid Object Class because of its intelligence, skills, and unpredictability. While the SCP Foundation is all about sacrificing the individual for the greater good, this is one frightening collective that they couldn't endorse becoming a part of.
The SCP Foundation personnel at Area 142 didn't understand what was happening. For days, researchers and guards had been complaining about headaches and nausea. Soon, the on-site water purification system broke down. A researcher experienced multiple organ failures, and the on-site hangar completely collapsed, causing the deaths of multiple airmen. What was happening at Area 142? Hi, I'm Dr. Bob, and this is SCP-1440, also known as The Old Man from Nowhere. SCP-1440 has the appearance of a human male, but its ethnicity and age are both unknown. When asked any details about itself or its past, including its name, birth date, or place of birth, SCP-1440 refuses to answer, though it's unknown if it is refusing to give this information, or if it simply does not know the answer to these questions. The aptly nicknamed Old Man from Nowhere appears to be around 80 years old, but in the 50 years that the SCP Foundation has been aware of its existence, SCP-1440 has not shown any signs of aging at all, and it has yet to be determined whether it is aging too slowly for a difference to be perceived in that time, or if it does not age at all, and this is its permanent appearance. But SCP-1440's lack of aging is not even the strangest thing about it. Its true anomalous nature reveals itself once it comes into contact with the human population or any man-made objects, and remains in contact with them for more than a few days. After several days of exposure, an acute adverse effect on anything and everything directly connected to humanity occurs in the vicinity of SCP-1440. Destructive events begin to happen and grow increasingly disastrous until the man-made objects are destroyed or the people in close contact are killed. The only exceptions to these destructive events are SCP-1440 itself and its few possessions, which consist of its clothes, a sack made of unidentified material, a pack of worn playing cards, and a small glass cup. It's unknown whether these objects are somehow protected from the destructive anomalous events, or whether they are not actually man-made items. SCP-1440 seems to be aware of its anomalous effects on human populations and objects, and appears to attempt to avert destruction of them by avoiding human contact as much as possible. However, SCP-1440 is for some reason compelled to travel in what looks like a highly complex pattern, one that always eventually leads to it running into human populations, whether it wants to or not. The particulars of this pattern, both its shape and the reason why SCP-1440 feels compelled to follow it, are as of yet unknown. And just like the other details of its origin, the Old Man from Nowhere has not been able to provide any additional information or help. SCP-1440 has explained that the growing size of the human population and its expansion into previously uninhabited areas has made it harder and harder to avoid contact with humanity, as it follows its complex pattern of movement.
SCP-1440 is not actively hostile, nor will it resist or fight back against attempts to contain it. Unfortunately for the SCP Foundation, all attempts to contain SCP-1440 have so far failed. These containment attempts have led to large losses of personnel life and Foundation resources as a result of the destructive anomalous effects that follow SCP-1440. The Old Man from Nowhere first came to the SCP Foundation's attention after SCP-1440 itself approached a Foundation researcher who was on her way to work. SCP-1440 somehow knew that this researcher worked for the Foundation and requested her assistance. When the researcher asked what kind of assistance it was looking for, it replied that it hoped the Foundation would be able to destroy it. It was brought to an SCP Foundation site for further questioning and study, which is where the destructive anomalous effects were first witnessed. The entire site was destroyed, killing multiple site personnel, as well as causing the destruction of 6 safe and Euclid-level SCP objects. So far, all other attempts to contain SCP-1440 have resulted in similar destructive events. SCP-1440 doesn't resist the SCP Foundation's attempts to contain it. During a 4th such attempt by the Foundation, SCP-1440 was brought to Area 142. The Old Man from Nowhere applauded the Foundation's ongoing efforts, but also expressed that it was for the best that it be allowed to leave, as the results for the researchers would be the same as the previous 3 attempts: death for all involved. SCP-1440 told the researcher interviewing it that its first brother had already arrived and was standing behind the researcher. It went on to explain that the brothers are different, but one and the same. They are all cruel, vengeful, and capable of holding a grudge for a long time. They are the cause of SCP-1440's misfortune, and therefore the cause of anyone who comes into contact with it. It then told the researcher that the second brother had arrived, and that time was running short. If it wasn't released soon, then the destruction would start. The researcher asked about the third brother, and questioned how much time they had since the third had apparently not yet arrived. SCP-1440 explained that the third, despite being the cruelest of all, never arrives, and that it's actually the appearance of the last brother that will somehow set the Old Man from Nowhere free. SCP-1440 has spent countless months and years searching for the third brother, trying to return something that he won from the other 2. It then made a reference to challenging death itself to a game of cards for its life, and if the researcher is ever in such a situation, they must not do what the Old Man from Nowhere did: win. At that very moment, the on-site nuclear device stored at Area 142 detonated, despite it having multiple failsafes in place that should have made such a detonation impossible. Area 142 was destroyed, and all on-site personnel were killed. SCP-1440 was spotted a week later, over 3,000 kilometers away from Area 142, showing no signs of having experienced any harm. After 3 additional containment attempts were made, and all ended in a similarly disastrous fashion, future attempts to contain SCP-1440 have been suspended indefinitely, until a suitable containment procedure that doesn't involve an unacceptable loss of resources and personnel can be found. Research and analysis of SCP-1440's traveling pattern continues, with a focus on minimizing civilian exposure to it, as does research into a way to hopefully permanently contain it in the future. Unfortunately, SCP-1440's location is currently unknown, and it has been given the object class Keter. A man opens his mouth to bite a hot dog and suddenly freezes. His eyes widen, and the hot dog drops from his hand, falling to the ground. Ahead, a stampede of people is running toward him, screaming, crying out for help. Behind them, a man walks at an ordinary, casual pace, but something is off. His eyes have a glazed, unfocused look to them, and he keeps shoveling random items into his open mouth, swallowing them down. He eats a clipboard and pen, a discarded shoe, and as the first man watches in horror, the very hungry man grabs the ankle of a fallen member of the crowd and pulls him into his mouth, devouring him. The first man turns to run for his life, only to be knocked to the ground by the rest of the crowd, trying to escape. He struggles to climb back to his feet, and a hand reaches out to take his. When he makes it to his feet, he looks up and sees the hungry man pulling him in, mouth stretching open wide. The sky is a perfect, cloudless blue. The air is warm from the unbroken sunlight, but cooled to the perfect temperature by a gentle breeze. And there is a sense of electricity, excitement, and competition in the air. Throngs of people have gathered together in a makeshift arena, piled into plastic chairs and swarming around concession stands, all training their eyes on the arena's center. What are they here for? Some sort of Olympic Games? A baseball tournament? A horse race? No, it's something greater, something meatier. It is the annual Midsummer Hot Dog Eating Contest, and locals and tourists alike are coming together to see just who can cram the most pork or beef hot dogs and buns down their gullets in front of a roaring crowd. The announcer makes his way to the front of the arena, standing with his arms wide in front of the long table behind him. As he calls out the names of this year's contestants, they file in, each taking his place behind the table. There is the previous year's champion, a burly man with a bushy beard and twinkling eyes, and there is this year's surprise competitor, a skinny 19-year-old college student with a hungry grin. Then there are the lesser-known contestants, a local father who signed up after making a joke with his daughter, an uncle who scrawled his name on the sign-up sheet after a few too many drinks, a recently retired man checking off another item on his golden years bucket list. All have come to the event today with full hearts and empty stomachs, ready to see who the year's victor will be. The announcer riles up the crowd, encouraging them to cheer as loudly as possible to spur on their chosen competitor. All the while, staff are carrying out trays piled high with hot dogs, more hot dogs than most people see in a year, except for the people who just really, really love hot dogs. Each contestant receives a tray of hot dogs, a bucket of water, and an additional empty bucket, just in case, well, you get the idea. With the supplies and competitors all in place, it is time to begin the countdown. The announcer holds up his favorite air horn and calls out,
3, 2, 1, eat!
At the sound of the air horn's blast, the men leap into action, seizing hot dogs from plates and each engaging in their unique competitive eating technique. The previous year's champion employs the method of famous hot dog eating champion Joey Chestnut, dunking his entire hot dog sloppily into his water, then swallowing it as quickly as possible. The new challenger, on the other hand, employs the Solomon method, named for King Solomon. Much like the fabled king suggested doing with a stolen infant, eaters using the Solomon method break the focus of their feasting in half before polishing it off. One of the more casual competitors attempts a divide and conquer technique, eating first the dog itself and then the bun. Others employ no specific technique at all, attempting to devour the stack of hot dogs before them, using the same classic eating style they might employ at a family barbecue. This is a grave mistake. One by one, the less prepared competitors drop out, spitting into their buckets, wiping meat sweats from their foreheads, waddling out of the arena while groaning and holding their aching stomachs. Soon, only the two frontrunners remain. But what's this? A challenger approaches. An unassuming black man, clad in a shirt and dress pants, rushes into the arena, his face a mask of single-minded determination, and begins seizing the discarded hot dogs off the table, gobbling them up as fast as he can. The announcer and the rest of the audience watch in stunned disbelief. This is unprecedented, and as exciting as it is, definitely against the rules. This man is not a registered competitor, and he certainly can't join the contest in the champion stretch. Unsure of what else to do, the announcer beckons to the staff on the sidelines, ushering them back toward the table to clear the food and escort this surprise drop-in out of the arena. The audience watches with rapt attention as the staff members attempt to remove the stranger from his place at the table. He shakes his head violently, refusing to go, and snatches the hot dogs away from them, even as they try to clear the trays away. All the while, the remaining competitors standing are attempting to stay the course and finish strong in spite of the interruption. The new, younger man collapses, slumping down onto the table in a hot dog-induced stupor. He has tapped out. The victor is the previous year's champion, with a staggering ultimate tally of 38 hot dogs. As 4 staff members work together to wrestle the stranger out of the arena, the champion steps forward to receive his trophy. The crowd roars as he holds up his arms, grinning ear to ear and basking in yet another win. The announcer can still see the staff struggling with the stranger out of the corner of his eye, but this crowd wants to see their champion crowned, and the show must go on. So he grabs the Hot Dog King sash, the crown made from gold-plated, hot dogs, and even the massive gold trophy. He crowns the winner, placing the sash over his shoulders. Then, as the music swells triumphantly, courtesy of the local high school marching band, the announcer holds up the trophy, sunlight glinting off its shiny surface. It represents so many things: achievement, celebration, the ability to eat just so much meat and not get sick, And now it is time for it to be awarded to the man who earned it. The announcer stretches his arms, handing over the trophy to the contest winner, when all of a sudden, another hand grabs hold of its handle, ripping it from the announcer's grasp. The stranger has returned, somehow freeing himself from the multiple security guards who escorted him away, and he has taken the trophy for himself. But he isn't just attempting to crown himself the hot dog king. No, this is not a simple coup de hot dog. He lifts the trophy up over his head, opening his mouth as wide as it will go, and tears the metal in half with a horrible screeching sound, shoving the pieces into his mouth, chewing and swallowing. By the time the announcer and the champion recover from their shock enough to move again, the trophy is completely gone, vanished into the stranger's belly. After a day of seemingly impossible feats of feasting, the sight of this strange man consuming a truly impossible meal of metal is just too much for the already anxious crowd to take. The arena erupts into absolute chaos as people spill out of their seats en masse, fleeing the area. The champion, however, does not turn and run. He feels robbed of his victory. Though it may have occurred in an utterly bizarre fashion, he won't stand for this kind of disrespect. He has trained all year for this moment, only to watch his trophy be eaten right in front of him. He marches right up to the stranger and pokes him in the chest, demanding to know who he thinks he is. What gives him the right to crash the hot dog eating contest, interrupt the proceedings, and upstage his victory by chowing down on the trophy? The man doesn't answer him, so the champion continues to berate him, wagging his finger in his face. The stranger's eyes follow the finger, and slowly he opens his mouth. There is a sudden chop, and the champion screams, holding his hand to his chest, using his shirt to stem the bleeding. He turns to run with the rest of the crowd, but it's too late. The stranger's hand clamps down on his shoulder, holding him in place with a surprising strength. The only thing he sees before his life is snuffed out is the stranger's wide-open mouth, before everything goes dark with another sickening chomp. All the while, the crowd's terror rises to a fever pitch at the horrible sight. They trample each other as they scramble to vacate the area, shoving strangers and loved ones alike out of the way in a bid to escape this mysterious equal-opportunity omnivore with an appetite for far more than just hot dogs. Some manage to escape, running far enough from the arena that they can stop to catch their breaths and glance back at the ones who were not so lucky. Those who tripped and fell in the madness, who had the wind knocked out of them by an elbow to the gut from one of their neighbors, those with weak ankles or who hadn't tied their shoes carefully enough. All of these poor, unfortunate souls are next on the menu for the stranger. He devours them one by one, rarely even stopping to chew. As one surviving woman watching from a distance pulls out her phone to call 911, she can't escape noticing the parallels to the contest itself, the way the stranger eats with a singular focus on consuming as much as possible. There's no pause to enjoy the meal, but there is no sadism or malice in the act either, just the sheer, undeniable drive to keep eating. The woman's call to the police is one of the strangest moments of her life and utterly baffles the local police department. "Ma'am, please calm down," one officer repeats again and again. "What do you mean there's a man eating people?" "I mean exactly what I said," she shouts. "A man showed up at the hot dog contest and started eating people. Please, you have to do something." "I think this is above our pay grade, miss," another officer chimes in. "You think we should call, the first officer trails off. Who? The woman demands, but the line goes dead before she can ask another question. The police are clearly no help, and she isn't about to stick around and see just how big this stranger's appetite is. She tried to save the others, but now she needs to save herself. She runs all the way home without another glance back. Meanwhile, the local police did make that mysterious call, and an SCP Foundation mobile task force is currently en route to the scene. By the time they arrive, the park is a ghost town, with nothing but the blood-stained grass and abandoned arena to suggest that something horrible ever happened here at all. But these aren't some bumbling local police officers who have no idea what to do with a man-eating anomaly. This team has seen enough bizarre sights to fill a lifetime, and another lifetime after that. They spy a trail of sticky red footprints leading away from the arena. At first, they assume that the substance is blood, but a closer examination reveals that it is, in fact, ketchup. They track the savory footprints away from the scene of the day's unsavory events, following them to a nearby warehouse. Judging from the scattered wooden beams, rustling metal, and boarded-up windows, this place has been abandoned for some time. The perfect place for an anomaly to hide away. If they weren't certain, the sound of someone inside biting through sheets of metal is plenty of indication that this is the right place. With no time to waste, they break down the door of the warehouse, weapons drawn and ready. They follow the sound of the chewing, splitting up to apprehend the subject from all available directions. The shriek of tearing metal echoes through the building, bouncing off the walls and creating a cacophony that is difficult to track. They do their best to follow the sound, but quickly veer off in separate directions in an attempt to cover as much ground as possible. One operative confronts the stranger just as he is reaching for another piece of metal. He watches as the man takes a massive bite out of the steel, a bite that should have shattered his teeth and broken his jaw. Instead, a cartoonish bite mark is taken out of the metal. He approaches the stranger, who, upon locking eyes with him, begins to shake his head, still chewing. The MTF operative ignores this visual cue, approaching the man and attempting to physically restrain him. This, like the confrontation with the champion before, is cut off with a fateful chomp, and the operative screams ringing out through the warehouse, alerting his teammates to his unfortunate fate. The screams suddenly go silent, and another MTF operative stops cold, listening as the sound of chewing draws nearer and nearer. He spins around to face the presence behind him and spots the stranger standing there. The otherwise ordinary man is polishing off the tip of a steel beam, grimacing as he swallows it. The operative lifts his weapon, pointing it at the subject. The operative tells him to stand down and come quietly. The hungry man pleads wide-eyed for the operative to turn and run while he still can. He takes small, reluctant steps toward the operative, muttering that he can't stop. The operative brandishes his weapon again, barking another order for the man to stop. Before he can make another move, the stranger snatches the weapon out of his hand, opens his mouth, and swallows it. He winces as he does, but does not stop until the weapon is completely devoured. All at once, he lets out a loud belch, his knees buckle, and he slumps to the ground. He rubs his stomach, wipes his brow, and sighs heavily. "I'm so sorry about that. I was just so hungry I couldn't help it." The man shakes his head sadly. "I hope you can get a new weapon. And I'm sorry about your friend, too. You said you couldn't help it. Why'd you stop?" The stranger shrugs, sighs again, and simply says, "Well, because I was full." After a bit of convincing, and a test confirming that the subject's strength and bite force has returned to ordinary human levels, the remaining mobile task force agreed to bring him into Foundation custody unharmed, though restrained. They pile into one of the SCP Foundation's trademark unmarked vans and set off toward the nearest Foundation site. About 1 hour into the trip, the subject begins to lament his growling stomach, asking if they could possibly stop somewhere for a bite to eat. Ordinarily, this is against protocol, but after what happened to their teammate, the task force members aren't taking any chances. They pull into a fast food drive-thru and permit the subject to order whatever he wants. They'll declare it as a business expense later. 5 burgers, 5 fries, 5 tacos, 5 pies, 5 cokes, 10 tater tots, 10 tenders, 5 shakes, 5 pancakes, 5 jalapeno poppers, and 5 baked potatoes later, the task force successfully reached the Foundation site with their newest subject, SCP-913. SCP-913 appears to be an average African-American man around middle age. Though his appearance is completely ordinary, his metabolism is unnaturally fast. He requires the recommended daily caloric intake for an average human being every 2 hours, and has an unusually high internal temperature, though the specific number has been redacted from his official file. If he does not meet his calorie requirement for a given 2-hour period, he will enter a trance state in which he is unable to control himself. In this state, he will break down and ingest any solid matter in his line of sight. This includes matter that would ordinarily be indigestible, including wood, plastic, and metal. In this state, his appetite does not distinguish between living and non-living subjects. When he is in this hunger-driven state, he is aware of all his actions, but cannot stop himself, even when he eats dense materials that cause him extreme discomfort. If this state hits while the subject is sleeping, he will be forced awake. In addition to his anomalous appetite, SCP-913 can rend objects at an estimated force of 3,000 newtons, and can bite objects with an estimated force of 5,000 newtons when eating them. Whenever he is not in his trance state, he cannot replicate this strength. An examination of SCP-913's liver tissue showed that it is capable of producing new enzymes in response to foreign material, allowing his body to digest matter that should be highly dangerous to consume. These enzymes metabolize the substrate at an efficiency of approximately 98%, detoxifying any drugs or toxins consumed by the subject during the hunger state or otherwise. This includes, but is not limited to, amnestics and anesthetics. When SCP-913 was first discovered, he was wearing a shirt and dress pants, both with the brand name Doctor's Orders sewn onto their tags. SCP-913 has no tattoos aside from one on his right calf, which reads, Mr. Hungry, from Little Misters by Dr. Wondertainment. Just in case you aren't aware, the Little Misters are a line of humanoid anomalies created by the mysterious Dr. Wondertainment Corporation, including the fish-headed Mr. Fish, the candy-coated Ms. Sweetie, and Mr. Life and Mr. Death, who is every bit as existentially upsetting as he sounds. The purpose of these creations is currently unknown, though, like many Dr. Wondertainment products, their existence invites endless speculation. SCP-913 must be contained in a customized humanoid containment cell lined with 1 meter thick carbon steel. 913 is to be provided standard furnishings for his containment cell, coinciding with the usual necessities for a comfortable humanoid dwelling. He may be given pre-recorded entertainment materials, such as concerts, films, and television shows upon request. The cell may be accessed via a reinforced carbon steel door. Once every 2 hours, SCP-913 is provided with 1 nutritional supplement as specified in Document 913-2. I attempted to locate a copy of 913-2 for further details on said nutritional supplement, but access to it appears to be limited to researchers assigned to SCP-913. While the subject is sleeping, nutrition is provided to SCP-913 via a central venous catheter that must be changed once every 3 months. These measures allow SCP-913 to receive the calories that he needs to avoid entering a hunger state, ensuring the safety of everyone on site, as well as his own comfort. Like the rest of the Little Misters, SCP-913 presents a puzzle that may never be solved. I could spend my limited time on this Earth wondering why Dr. Wondertainment would create a being that seems to serve no purpose other than eating as much as possible, lest he unwillingly destroy the environment around him. But I believe that would be a waste of time. Why does Dr. Wondertainment do anything that they do? Why create a woman who can turn men into candy soldiers? Why create an ordinary man with a fish head, a tiny top hat, and a Boston accent? The personal motivations of Dr. Wondertainment, whether they are an individual or a massive conglomerate, are as inscrutable to me as the meaning of life itself, or the reasons why a person would want to eat more than 2 hot dogs in one sitting.
The old house has been abandoned for going on 2 decades, and as with any place that's been left uninhabited for this long, rumors tend to spiral. Of course, there are the more mundane explanations for why the 2-story, 4-bedroom home on the end of a nice street lays in semi-ruin. Black mold, asbestos, rising house prices. But those weren't the stories that most people told. Everyone in the neighborhood knew what really happened. All those years ago, the family that lived there had been murdered, and their killer was never caught. The 3 young paranormal investigators, with EMF readers in their hands and GoPro cameras mounted on their hard hats, know all about this. They approach the house in the dead of night, mumbling commentary for the recordings. If the old house really is as haunted as everyone says it is, then they could be in for something really good here. Their subscribers always loved brand new paranormal content. They use a crowbar to breach the front door and head inside. It's everything you can expect from a house that had been abandoned for 17 years. Dust, cobwebs, and graffiti abound, broken bottles scattered across the floor. Someone has scrawled, "Welcome to Hell," above the door in faded Sharpie. It all plays perfectly for the cameras. Paranormal content gold. All of them turn on their flashlights, generously provided to them by one of their sponsors, of course. But in this particular situation, they have no idea just how valuable their product really is. After all, there are some frightening things that hide in the dark. The leader of the trio begins ascending the stairs, narrating into his helmet cam, giving the more popular version of the house's legend. The perfect suburban family, torn apart, literally, by a killer hiding in their home. The family had all been brutally murdered by someone in their home, but the police never found any sign of unlawful entrance or exit. There were no clues to the killer's presence whatsoever, in fact. It was as if they were a ghost, a vapor. It was almost as though whoever killed the family had always been in that house, and even after the murders were committed, they never left the place either. As he tells the story, the lead investigator starts to feel a little nervous. Even though he himself doesn't really believe in the supernatural, he just plays up reactions for the views, he still can't help but wonder, should I really be here? Am I making a terrible mistake? Is there a chance that whatever did this all those years ago could still be in the house, waiting for me? But he pushes those thoughts from his mind. This gig is too valuable for him to wimp out now. And really, what are the chances that something actually dangerous would be lurking in the house? The other 2 investigators are still looking around downstairs, sticking together, their flashlight beams slicing through the darkness. Their boss always insists on going upstairs first. He demands the glory shot, after all.
That leaves the rest of them searching the downstairs living room, dining room, and kitchen, where the best they can hope for is maybe a particularly haunted-looking dishwasher. It's why the younger of the two is so surprised when they suddenly feel something happening to their body that they've never experienced before. In an instant, their whole body convulses with an involuntary shudder. They feel the temperature drop, and the world gets just that little bit darker. The best way they can describe the feeling is impending doom. Like any moment now, something terrible is going to happen. But almost as soon as the feeling begins, it's gone. Intensity dropping. The dread starting to dissipate, as though whoever or whatever caused this feeling literally passed right through them. Their fellow investigator asks them if they're okay. Of course, they nod and force a smile. They're fine. It's just a spooky place is all. Atmosphere like this would get to anyone. Meanwhile, the lead investigator is exactly where he wants to be, ascending a rickety stepladder up into the attic. The very same attic where, all those years ago, the police had found what was left of the family. And from everything he'd read on the subject, their remains weren't a pretty sight, even by true crime enthusiast standards. He enters the attic and shines his flashlight around, capturing all the dusty old boxes left to rot in the cold. He's engrossed in the macabre spectacle of what had once been the worst and final moments of a group of strangers' very real lives. The attic is full of spider webs and shadows. They're so ubiquitous that as the lead investigator pauses to tell his camera the next chapter of the grisly tale, he doesn't even notice one of the shadows peeling off of the wall behind him. It wafts silently towards him like a gust of midnight air. Little by little, the blob of shadow starts to take on a vaguely human shape. It leans forward in the investigator's direction, arms extended like a classic movie monster. Long, dark claws slide out of its shadowy hands. Downstairs, the other two investigators hear the most terrible scream. For a moment, the more fantastical thought crosses their minds. Could this be one of the tormented souls of the departed family, longing to be heard after years of silence? Then it occurs to them that they recognize the scream. It belongs to their boss. The two of them charge up the stairs, flashlights in hand, as the screaming starts to become more desperate and pained, like that of a wounded animal with its leg caught in a trap. Those terrible wails are echoing down from the open hatch leading into the attic. It's so dark up there, something must have broken his flashlight. That's when they notice something else. Red, dripping from the open hatch. For a moment, they hesitate, wondering what could be going on up there. Could they really help, or would they just be running into the danger themselves? But soon, their desire to save their boss's life overpowers their fear. They grab the ladder and start climbing, feeling the dripping blood on the worn wooden rungs. When they finally get up into the attic, it feels like the scream is coming from everywhere, bouncing off the walls in a terrible, echoing cacophony of pain. They turn in all directions, hovering their flashlight beams around the room in wide, sweeping arcs, until both fall on the source of all this terror. And when they see it, they can't help but scream too. The lead investigator's body is floating about a foot off the ground, his screams now fading into pained gurgles. Something huge and dark is lifting him up with one hand and sinking the long, dark claws of its other into his neck. The second the twin flashlight beams concentrate on the creature, it drops the lead investigator's bleeding body down onto the ground. His skin slate gray, his feeble twitching slowing to a halt as the last of his life drains from him. Two glowing red pinpricks open up in the face of the dark figure, eyes like terrible, burning coals etching themselves into their memory. Like smoke, it continues to glide backwards further, seeking refuge in the dark, a safe haven amongst the other shadows. By this point, the two surviving investigators know there's nothing they can do for their boss anymore. All that's left is to get out and survive. They have to save themselves. They turn, wasting no time running towards the exit. They don't notice it, but the second they turn the beams of their flashlights away, the shadow's terrible eyes disappear, and it starts advancing towards them again, its claws outstretched and grasping for them with awful fury. The shadow creature grabs at their heads as they make their final leap for the exit. However, all the monster can pull away are their helmets and helmet cams as they scramble down the ladder and then down the stairs, running at speeds they didn't even think possible as the shadow slithers down behind them. It doesn't give up. It wants their lives. It wants their warm human blood on its claws. They clear the threshold of the accursed house and keep running to their car. One looks over their shoulder and sees the shadow leave the house, gaining on them, both claws outstretched and ready to rend their flesh. The two climb into their car. They see the shadow coming towards their window. It's moving so quickly, only a few feet away now. It's getting closer and closer and closer. Ignition. The car starts up and the driver smashes the pedal down. They take off, quickly accelerating up to illegal speeds as the shadow continues to chase, slowly getting smaller and smaller in the rearview mirror. A distant nightmare. A terrible, dark ghost. As it finally disappears, they feel a moment of safety. But really, only a moment. Because it occurs to them then that they cannot say, with any confidence, that this monster won't just be waiting for them when they get home. SCP-280, also known as Eyes in the Dark, is one of the more frightening and dangerous anomalies contained by the SCP Foundation. Of course, it likely won't be causing an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario anytime soon, but if you happen to run into this nocturnal monster, it's likely to cause an end-of-you scenario and remove you from the world with extreme prejudice. There's no way of telling just how many lives it claimed before the SCP Foundation finally got it into containment, and perhaps it's best to just not think about that. SCP-280 is a black wraith-like apparition that floats at roughly average human height, with no visible legs or feet, as the lower portion of its body simply fades away before it reaches the ground. In its dormant state, the entity may appear to be little more than a shadow, easily dismissed, especially in dark environments. This comes as a natural result of the being's frightening ability to become intangible at will, and only become physical when it enters a state of active aggression toward a human target. In this intangible state, victims have even been known to walk through the shadowy mass by accident. While this doesn't lead to any detrimental physical effects, victims report that being inside the creature can lead to heightened states of anxiety, fear, and dread. Despite its body being wholly composed of an unidentifiable black matter, when exposed to light, the creature does begin to express a pair of glowing dots on its head similar to eyes, hence its frightening nickname. However, all tests indicate that these eyes aren't actually functional. Instead, they appear to be a kind of defensive measure, like false eyes on the carapace of an insect. These eyes are never shown when SCP-280 is advancing towards a victim, only when it is in retreat, though this is only one of the entity's several defensive responses. If an area where the creature is residing becomes fully illuminated, or a sudden flash of extremely bright light is directed against it, then it will immediately dematerialize and appear in a different area. The one positive thing that can be said about the hunting patterns of SCP-280 is that they're relatively predictable. The entity, it seems, only has an interest in human beings. When it selects a target, it will pursue them relentlessly, approaching in its intangible form with its arms extended in what many describe as a sleepwalker pose. In this state, you may finally notice 280's claws, long, thin, and razor sharp. It may silently approach while the victim is turned the other way, or while they sleep soundly in bed, or even when they're paralyzed in fear at the very sight of it. When SCP-280 closes the distance, it will begin to rip and tear at its victims with its claws, causing massive physical trauma and, in some cases, death. Attacks range from 1 to 5 minutes of being relentlessly clawed at by the beast. When the attack is over, it will simply expose its eyes, become intangible once more, and escape. You will not be able to overpower the creature. Foundation tests have shown that it has extreme physical strength, and it's capable of tearing apart solid steel with little effort. If it can't find any humans to victimize, then it will simply remain dormant, pressing itself up against a wall, in a dark corner, or within some other structure. Which is why, if ever you feel nervous about a certain dark corner in a room near you, it is best to remove yourself from the situation as quickly as possible and remain in a brightly lit area. It would perhaps be comforting to believe that SCP-280 is acting on some twisted form of animal instinct. After all, while the results may seem horrific to us, every organism has to eat, right? Well, sadly, that isn't the case here. SCP-280 does not appear to eat, sleep, or breathe to survive, and it never consumes any of the matter torn from its victims. The best working theory is that the entity simply enjoys the harm it causes, taking a degree of perverse pleasure in hunting down and murdering its targets. There is no better nature to appeal to here. The SCP Foundation's ability to study the creature's biology has also been stunted, in part due to the creature's highly aggressive nature, and also the fact that its selective intangibility makes gaining physical samples almost impossible. Even capturing and containing the creature in the first place came partially out of blind luck. It first came to Foundation attention after a series of mysterious locked-door murders in a small Mississippi township. In the most recent case, an entire family had been brutally murdered in their home, leaving only one survivor. A traumatized 9-year-old boy named David, who'd locked himself in the basement when he started to hear the screaming. He was so terrified by the things he saw that night that he remained in a catatonic state for weeks afterwards, completely unresponsive to outside stimulus. But one little detail saved his life. A flashlight was clasped in his white-knuckle grip, shining a bright beam of cold, white light onwards. When David was removed and placed into medical care, officers began searching the building for any kind of clues as to how the other 4 family members were murdered. However, during this investigation, the police were just as vulnerable as the victims who'd been so recently slain. While one officer was wandering around the attic, looking for any evidence they may have missed, SCP-280 emerged from the darkness and attacked, tearing into his body with its long, deadly claws. Luckily for the officer in question, he survived the incident, though he was badly wounded. His report on the matter, including the ardent claim that he was attacked by a being, quote, made from black smoke, caught the attention of SCP Foundation operatives embedded in the precinct. They soon took over the investigation and descended on the house, hoping to tag and bag whatever had been behind all these deaths. This would be easier said than done. While Foundation field agents canvassed the home, they simply walked past the creature multiple times, discounting it as a mere shadow. After all, it only had these easily identifiable glowing eyes when it was in a retreating position. Even when it entered its physical state, operatives brushing up against it generally dismissed the sensation as hair, clothing, or some other object touching them in the dark. This already bungled investigation got even worse when the Foundation decided to introduce high-intensity lights into the equation, hopefully flushing the creature out. This, of course, only caused it to dematerialize and appear elsewhere. The chase ended in an almost farcical fashion, a cavalcade of Foundation agents chasing a cloud of sneering black smoke across a Mississippi field at 2:30 a.m. Thankfully for the human race, the entity was, at the very least, eventually secured and contained. However, this wouldn't be the last time it was out of containment. During a series of tests with different types of illumination, intending to test SCP-280's reflexes, it disappeared from its chamber. It seemed almost to sink through the different levels of the illuminated site before coming to rest at the containment chamber holding SCP-1591. This made for a fascinating accidental cross-test. You see, SCP-1591, to put it simply, is a unique sculpture of a star that emits an incredibly bright light, and this light will slowly make any being subject to its glow intangible before disappearing completely. When SCP-280 came before SCP-1591, it displayed its eyes, but did not retreat. In fact, it assumed a kneeling position and simply remained before the anomalous sculpture until it faded from existence. It then remanifested in its own containment chamber several hours later without incident. All things considered, it went pretty well as far as containment breaches involving deadly, human-hating monsters go. Because of its ability to demanifest and phase through solid objects, SCP-280 is incredibly difficult to contain, earning it the dreaded Keter object class. In order to avoid the risk of demanifestation, SCP-280 is contained in a 5x5 meter cell that is perpetually left in a state of total darkness. No equipment is to be left in the cell unsupervised at any time, and any items brought into the cell for testing must be removed when the testing is complete. Any staff members entering the chamber for tests must be equipped with infrared goggles, an infrared ID strobe, and also a strong flashlight to ward the creature off in the case that it becomes aggressive. If SCP-280 does attempt to attack anyone in the chamber, all attending staff are instructed to turn on their flashlights and turn the beams against the creature. No aggressive action is permitted, and staff members must remain at least 1 meter away from SCP-280 at all times for their own safety. And if you suddenly feel yourself getting a little nervous in an eerily dark room, I'd like you to remember this. The one thing more frightening than seeing eyes in the dark is not seeing them.
The year is 1630, and the city of London is bustling with new life. The streets are filled with people going about their daily lives, cramming into housing and businesses, and struggling to accommodate the rapidly increasing population, which has more than doubled in the previous 50 years. Among the new citizens of London is a dark figure who keeps to himself, a man in long black robes and a beaked mask, dressed like the plague doctors of the Black Death centuries before. The figure that will one day be known as SCP-049 has come to London town to embark on the next chapter of his life in his ongoing quest to solve the ills plaguing humanity. Though one might expect his appearance to make him stand out, most of the citizens surging through the city streets have far more important things on their minds than what the man in the mask might be up to. So he has managed to carve out a little sanctuary, an empty warehouse where he rests and works. When curiosity gets the better of him, he slinks down alleyways, avoiding crowds and listening for any whispered secrets he can catch from the shadows.
It is on one of these outings that he hears tell of Henry Percy, also known as the Wizard Earl, a mysterious researcher of science and the occult, held in Martin Tower in the Tower of London. A man of wisdom and curiosity, pushing the boundaries of scientific study. That is just the sort of man that the Doctor has been hoping to meet and learn from here in this great city. The Plague Doctor swiftly abandons his sanctuary and makes his way to the Tower of London, where he makes swift work of the guards that would bar him from entry. He does not enjoy harming innocents, but alas, some sacrifices must be made in the pursuit of greater knowledge and understanding. Leaving a trail of bodies in his wake, the Plague Doctor makes his way into Martin Tower.
Excuse me, sir. I apologize for the intrusion, but as a fellow academic, I wondered if I might speak with you.
But as he enters the chamber, the Doctor finds that his polite introduction was wasted on an empty room. Wherever this Wizard Earl might be, he is not in his designated quarters. Fearing the worst, the Doctor searches for signs of a struggle, for bloodstains on the floor or overturned furniture, but everything appears to be in its rightful place. Where, then, could Henry Percy have gone? The Plague Doctor explores every inch of the tower, searching for any clues that might point him in the direction of the missing man. He inspects every item on every surface, pulls every book from every shelf. But as he pulls one particular book from its spot, the bookshelf appears to pop loose from the wall like a door opening. Indeed, it is a door, revealing a dark, winding stairway just beyond its secret opening.
Ah, so this is where you have disappeared to.
Truly, this Earl must be a clever man, a good ally to have in the battle against the pestilence. He follows the stairs down, down, into a small room in the bowels of the tower. It is a sparse, barren room, with only a stack of journals and a large iron door. The Doctor spends hours searching for a lock or other mechanism to open the door, before turning to the journals left behind by the tower's occupant. There, he discovers the instructions for unlocking the iron gateway, directions he recognizes from his time studying alchemy. Fortunately, he has all of the necessary materials tucked away in his trusty doctor's bag, and he is able to effectively perform the esoteric procedure. As he dusts off his gloved hands, content with a job well done, he hears the click of a bolt unlatching, and the second secret door he has discovered today swings open to welcome him in. Ever the adventurous spirit, the Doctor picks up his bag and crosses the threshold into whatever awaits him on the other side. As the iron door shuts behind him, the Doctor gazes up into a yellow sky dotted with an infinite number of black stars. A breeze blows the scent of dried flowers, mold, and the dusty pages of century-old books into his nostrils. He hears the sound of waves lapping at a shore and turns to take in the sight of a thick black sea washing up onto a stark white shore. The world around him is an array of black, white, yellow, and red, the yellow sky reflecting in the inky waves, the glittering black stars dancing above garish red buildings, white staircases, yellow doors, and black windows made from something like stained glass. This strange new place is not empty either. All around him, there are as many people bustling through the streets as there are back in London, though their attire is quite different. These people dress in a way that feels familiar, that reminds the Plague Doctor of the ornate clothing he once saw at the Carnival of Venice. The people cover their faces too, commedia dell'arte masks hiding their features and giving them a mysterious appearance. For the first time since the days of the Black Plague, the Doctor is keenly aware of the fact that he does not stand out in this place. In fact, he blends right in. Now to search for Henry Percy, or anyone else who can offer the Doctor some helpful insight. Uncertain of where exactly to start, the Doctor decides to simply strike up a conversation with a stranger. A woman walks by in an elaborate red gown, her feathery white mask almost resembling a swan.
Excuse me, madame,
the Doctor calls to her, stepping into her path.
No time to talk, I'm already quite late.
She brushes past him, and the Doctor braces for the ill effect of physical contact between the two to take hold. However, she continues on her merry way, seemingly unaffected by his normally deadly touch. He watches her go, stunned into silence for a moment. The citizens of this strange new place, it is safe for him to touch them. Something else catches his eye about the woman too. Up close, it seemed to him that her mask was not a costume piece, but in fact, a part of her face, much like his mask was a part of his own.
How curious,
he remarks aloud to himself. Henry Percy can wait. This is a far more compelling matter.
I must uncover more about this land.
And so the Plague Doctor takes a long stroll through the unusual city, noticing as he goes that the geometry and gravity of this place do not play by the rules he recognizes. Buildings slant at odd angles, alleyways and corridors appear and disappear as the layout of the city seems to shift at random with each glance. The people themselves are just as bizarre as the place they occupy, behaving either uniquely rudely or entirely too familiar. Pushing past the doctor with a glare or tugging at his robes insistently, attempting to pull him down an alleyway or into a rapturous bout of sudden fevered dancing in a town square. He refuses these advances as politely as possible and carries on his way. An elegantly dressed couple gives him a friendly wave as they walk by him, not an unusual occurrence. What is unusual is where they are waving from, looking down on him from an upside-down staircase that they traverse with no trouble. Some other gravity source holding them in this reversed position as they disappear into a dizzyingly constructed building. Fascinating. The doctor shakes his head in awe. Then it occurs to him. He should be taking notes on all of this. He opens his bag and digs around for his leather-bound notebook, but can't seem to find it. He stops on the street and begins dumping out the contents of his pack onto the stone walkway. Jars of specimens, salves, syringes, and surgical tools all tumble out, but no notebook. It must have fallen out of his bag somewhere on his journey. Or worse, it could have been stolen by one of these flamboyantly dressed strangers. No, he mustn't allow his mind to jump to the worst possible explanation. Most likely he simply dropped it somewhere, and he only needs to retrace his steps to find it. He begins to walk back the way he came, as best he can find it in city streets that seem to warp and change with every moment like the landscape of a dream. He approaches dozens of people, but each stranger he speaks to brushes him aside, rushing off to their far more important business. They seem to look at him with disdain, like something foul stuck to the bottom of their fine shoes. It is discouraging, and it seems as if the notebook may very well be lost forever. But then, hope. Amidst a sea of people hurrying to their next destination, the doctor spots a man in a red cloak standing notably still, leaning against a nearby wall. The figure looks up at him, eyes shining behind a red mask in the shape of a happy, smiling face, reminiscent of the figure of Il Capitano from Commedia dell'arte performances the doctor dimly recalls. He sheepishly approaches the grand figure in the cloak and red mask, explaining that he is an outsider to this place. When the red-masked man speaks, he speaks in a warm voice, but with a distinct air of authority.
Welcome to Alagada, sir, for that is the name of this kingdom. You are fortunate, very fortunate indeed, for I am the Red Lord of Alagada, wearer of the mirthful mask, a chief advisor to the king.
Being a man with medieval origins, the plague doctor bows deferentially the second he hears that he's in the presence of a lord. With his knees on the ancient cobblestones below, he begs the Red Lord for assistance in finding his precious notebook, the bearer of all his research and valuable scientific secret. The Red Lord pushes himself away from the wall, standing at an impressive height, seemingly suddenly far larger than he had at first glance. His face seems to strike a sympathetic tone, as sympathetic as one can be while wearing a mask. With a grandiose hand gesture and a dramatic stride, he asks the doctor to follow him and begins strutting off down the alleyway. The doctor has come across a person with good manners in this confounding place. He follows close behind the Red Lord as the two traverse the unstable landscape, following a yellow cobblestone street to a winding black staircase that curls around and around in a seemingly eternal spiral before tilting dizzyingly on its side. The doctor hesitates, afraid he will lose his footing, but much to his surprise, the laws of gravity seem to shift along with the angle of the stairs. It feels as if he is still walking along the same even plane as before, though he can see the sights below now jutting out of view at a disconcerting right angle that makes his vision swim and his stomach turn. So he turns his gaze onto his companion's back, matching the Lord's every confident step. He wonders idly where the man is taking him, but decides to hold off on additional questions until they have reached their destination. The Red Lord comes to a stop at the top of a tall, thin tower. He stands before an unusually shiny black door that curls down at the edges, like the entryway itself is frowning. He sweeps his arm in the direction of the door and beckons the plague doctor to follow him inside. Before the plague doctor can even mention that the door has no handle or knocker, it simply opens of its own accord, as if by magic. He shakes his head. The Red Lord has already vanished inside, and he quickly follows him. The color palette of Alagada is already quite limited, but this room is stripped of the scant bits of bright pigment found outside. Not a scrap of red or yellow can be seen here, save for the suddenly garish garb of the Red Lord himself. The chamber is decorated in black and white, shimmering black velvet and cold, cruel white marble or something like marble, as this material has an eerie, icy sheen that almost hurts to look at. In a large black chair that again curls down at the edges in a melancholy fashion, there sits another masked man. He is clad in black robes, and his pale white face bears the face of tragedy, open mouth curved into a permanent frown of anguish. The Red Lord gestures to the figure in the chair, who does not speak, and introduces him as the mighty Black Lord of Alagada. The Plague Doctor can see the Black Lord's eyes following him from within the holes of the mask. A mask that members of the SCP Foundation would later refer to as SCP-015. The Doctor asks whether the Black Lord can help him find his book, puzzled at this whole situation. The Red Lord throws his head back and begins to laugh, a warm and genuine sound that nonetheless sends a shiver down the Doctor's spine. The Red Lord claps a hand on the Doctor's shoulder, giving it a squeeze that feels encouraging and threatening all at once, explaining that he'd been brought here under false pretenses. The Lord's already had the book. The Black Lord just needs a favor before he can have it back.
Thank you for accepting my invitation.
The Black Lord speaks, his voice hissing out from the scowling mouth of his mask. The Plague Doctor protests, demanding his book, furious at the deception.
Oh, you'll get them back.
The Red Lord laughs again.
The Black Lord will return them if you prove yourself worthy of their ownership. I bid you farewell, Doctor. May your stay in Alagada be pleasant.
The Red Lord sweeps out of the room, leaving the Doctor alone with the Black Lord. Silence hangs heavy between the two, before the Doctor asks the Black Lord why he'd even want a physician from another world to attend to him. The Black Lord wheezes and spits up black slime that corrodes the ground beneath him. The Doctor shakes his head.
I am no miracle worker, only a simple doctor. I struggle to treat the ailments of my own world. I do not wish to disappoint you, but I have failed again and again to cure the pestilence that plagues my home. I do not know if I would have the capacity to cure you.
The Black Lord's frown seems to deepen.
I am very sorry to hear that. Perhaps I should keep your notes for myself then, and give them to an Alagadan physician for research.
The Doctor's composure breaks. He stomps about the chamber, flinging open every door he can find, searching desperately for the work he'd spent his extremely long life painstakingly compiling, the work that represented his sole efforts in the medical field. He stops at a padlocked door on the far side of the room, grabbing hold of its lock. The Black Lord suddenly cries for him to stop, but it is too late. The Plague Doctor has wrenched the lock free from the door. As soon as the Doctor lets the lock clatter to the ground, there is a horrid skittering sound, like the legs of a massive metal spider crawling along a wall. Click, click, click. And then, all at once, the formerly padlocked door is thrown open with such force it nearly rips from its hinges. A creature crawls through the opening, a monster with the body of a shiny yellow spider, a smooth white humanoid torso, 2 long clawed arms, and a round, featureless orb of a face. It lashes out blindly, raking its claws at the Black Lord where he sits on his chair. Then, before the Plague Doctor can even try to apprehend it, the monster rips through the main door of the chamber, climbing out and over the edge of the tower, and down to the city below. The Black Lord shouts for the Plague Doctor to help him.
What about the monster? What will become of it?
The Plague Doctor's mind races, trying to wrap around what he just witnessed. But the Black Lord has no interest in the monster. The city guards will take care of that. He needs help with his own injuries. The Lord groans in pain, a thick black substance leaking from his wounds and spreading across the once pristine white floor. The Black Lord implores the Plague Doctor to treat him. The Plague Doctor remembers his duty to all that suffer from illness and injury, an oath he once took a long, long time ago, and he opens his doctor's bag, ready to get to work. He has no grasp of Alagadan physiology, no idea where to begin in terms of performing any procedure on the Black Lord, but he cannot stand idly by and watch this man suffer. He begins pulling instruments from his bag, vials of phosphorescent elixirs and foul-smelling tinctures, and begins to improvise. He cleans the wounds with gauze dipped in one of his many tinctures, then begins treating them. The Black Lord's shallow breathing slows to deeper, calmer breaths as the medicine begins to do its job, and these positive results spur the doctor to work faster. He seals up each of the wounds, then slathers them all in a glowing green salve to prevent infection, if infection even exists in this world. When the work is finished, the Black Lord sits up, seemingly to be completely recovered, except for the visible stitches and the tearing of his robes.
Thank you, Doctor. I stole from you, and yet you helped me anyway. Allow me to return this to you, along with my sincerest gratitude.
He reaches into the depths of his robes and produces the doctor's leather-bound notebook.
Take it.
The doctor snatches the notebook from the Black Lord's grip and returns it to its rightful place inside of his bag.
Villain,
he mutters to himself as he does.
Our ways may seem strange to you,
the Black Lord says.
But these are troubled times in Alagada. All is not well in the court of the Hanged King. There is deception and betrayal everywhere.
All kingdoms encounter periods of strife.
the plague doctor remarks.
If you will excuse me, now that I have treated you, I will be on my way back to my own land. I do not wish to stay here any longer.
Of course.
The Black Lord waves him toward the door. As the doctor prepares to leave, however, the Black Lord speaks again.
Are you quite sure that is your land, Doctor? You look quite like the child of a woman I once knew, long ago, who made the mistake of defying the king. She had the face of a crow, as you do. A mask that was not a mask.
Excuse me?
The plague doctor does not understand.
Were you born in your world? Were you a child there? Do you remember it that way?
The Black Lord asks. The doctor thinks for a long moment. He cannot recall ever being anything other than what he is now, a doctor with a singular purpose.
I do not know.
Perhaps, dear Doctor, this is not your first time in the land of Alagada, and I imagine that, with time, you shall walk its twisted alleys once again. Consider that on your journey back to the place you call home.
The Black Lord laughs, a low, hollow sound.
Farewell.
Eager to be rid of this place with its lies, tricks, and monsters of many shapes, the plague doctor takes his leave. This journey he hoped would provide some answers, but instead, all he found were more questions than he ever could have anticipated. You've seen his face before, probably during a particularly distressing bout of sleep paralysis. His appearance can vary a bit from manifestation to manifestation, but a few traits are always present. He resembles an elderly man. His touch corrodes everything in his path. His presence creates a disgusting, black, mucus-like substance thought to be a method of pre-digestion of his prey. And he is rotting. No matter his appearance, he is always in some stage of decomposition. Gray skin sloughing away from yellowed bone, eyes milky and flat, but brimming with malice, wide, toothless mouth stretched into a wicked grin. The entity is incredibly difficult to contain. Its corrosive properties and ability to vanish into solid matter and disappear into its pocket dimension layer make it a threat as unpredictable as it is dangerous. The smell of decay and the presence of visible corrosion on any surfaces nearby may be the only warning a person gets before the old man grabs them in his decomposing arms, dragging them off to a painful, terrifying demise. We know where the being disappears to and have learned a great deal about how he operates. But where did he come from? It is the year 2000. Dr. Robert Scranton and his wife, Dr. Anna Lang, are the head researchers at SCP Foundation Site-120. Over the course of their happy relationship, the two have been working on an experimental research project, an early prototype reality-anchor device called the Lang-Scranton Stabilizer. After a lot of late nights at the office, working and reworking the theory, it is, at long last, ready for testing. Dr. Scranton is standing in Reality Lab A as Dr. Lang observes from a nearby room. He follows the same routine he has followed each time they tested the LSS, walking down a line of buttons and levers, pressing and flipping each into place. The little red blinking light signifies that the microphone is recording his every comment and observation. Suddenly, the routine is broken by a low rumbling sound from deep, deep within the earth. The ground beneath him begins to shake, and Dr. Scranton stumbles, losing his balance as the once solid floor begins to roil and quake as the seismic shift rolls through the site. He hears the unmistakable grind and splintering of metal and plastic as the LSS-2 begins to shake, components sliding out of place and breaking off. Nearby, Dr. Lang's monitor goes dark as the security feed is cut short by the earthquake's damage. "Robert!" she screams, making a break for the door and rushing to Reality Lab A, terrified that she will find her husband's body lying on the floor. When she and the guards reach the room, however, they find nothing. Well, not nothing entirely. The room is a wreck, bits of machinery strewn across the floor, the smell of burning plastic in the air. But the Lang-Scranton Scrambler's control panel and Dr. Robert Scranton are nowhere to be found. Dr. Lang falls to her knees in the suddenly empty room, pounding at the floor in despair. "Where did he go?" she demands, but of course, no one knows the answer. No one wants to say what they're thinking. Wherever he is, Dr. Scranton is probably dead. Probably long, long gone, and he is never coming back. But no one says it, not out loud. They just think it, and keep thinking it, for the next 5 years, 11 months, and 21 days. The time passes, and most everyone forgets about Dr. Robert Scranton. Everyone except for Dr. Anna Lang. She never gives up hope, never lets go of the possibility that somewhere, in another world, another time,
on another planet, her love is still alive. One day she wakes up and it's December 23rd, 2005, a day like any other, save for its uncomfortable proximity to the holidays she struggles to celebrate nowadays. But then, in the middle of the day, something impossible happens. The LSS control panel reappears in Reality Lab A. It isn't how anyone last saw it, though. It's coated in some sort of unidentified organic matter, and it reeks of blood, vomit, and decay. As her colleagues try to shield her from the sight, try to warn her away, Dr. Anna Lang wades into the area, desperate for a glimpse at any sign of her husband's fate. As she makes her way into the containment field, she is unable to contain her horror.
Oh God, what the hell? What is all this? This is the... Oh God, Robert? Robert? Is this you? Oh God, please, no, don't let it be you, Robert, I thought, how can this thing be?
Her colleagues try to stop her, but she touches the Lang-Scranton stabilizer interface, and it fires to life. It still works. Somehow, it still works. She racks her brain for what to do next, before saying, "Access audio log, playback starting from January 2nd, 2000. The machine prompts her to verbally state her password, and her voice shakes as she replies, "Password is Anna Bobana." "Request acknowledged. Processing," the machine replies. "I'm sorry. There are no audio logs for January 2nd, 2000. Dr. Scranton accessed log on January 13th, 2000 via voice recognition at time." Anna slams her hands down on the machine with a cry. "Play back now! Damn it, play it back!" A researcher warns her not to touch any of the material with her bare hands, but she doesn't hear him. She's too busy calling out to Robert, hoping that somehow, somewhere, he can hear her.
There's so much blood here, there's so much... Honey, are you okay? Where did you go? Oh God, oh God, oh God.
Something small and metallic clatters to the floor, lost in the sludge. She retrieves it, wipes it off on her lab coat, and holds it to the light. She would recognize it anywhere. She slipped it onto her true love's finger on the happiest day of her life. It's Robert's wedding ring. Her knees buckle at the realization. She collapses to the ground, and her head cracks against the floor. One of her colleagues snaps into action. "Report, this is Dr. Matthew Skinner reporting from Site 120, Reality Lab A. I need medical attention here immediately." Once Dr. Lang recovers from her fall, she demands access to the rematerialized control panel. She's going to go through the audio logs one by one and find out exactly what happened to her husband, even if the truth is as ugly as she fears. The machine whirs to life, and her lost love's voice emanates from the speakers.
Name, Robert Scranton. Age, 39. Birthday, September 19th, 1961. Favorite color, blue. Favorite song, Living on a Prayer. Wife, Anna. She has green eyes.
I love her very much.
He repeated these simple truths to himself for days, before he even realized that the control panel was picking up his voice.
My name is Robert Scranton. Yeah, my name is Robert Scranton, former researcher at Foundation Site 120. It has been... I don't know, actually. I can't remember. I estimate it's been 10 days, but I can't... Oh, God. Can anyone hear me? I don't know what's happened. I don't know where I am, and please, is anyone there? Hello? Anyone? Anyone?
He began keeping track of how much time passed as best he could.
2 weeks, 3 days, 7 hours, and 58 minutes. Oh, Jesus.
Back at the Foundation, with at least a tenuous knowledge of where Dr. Scranton could be, personnel try their best to stage some kind of rescue effort. A mobile task force team is ordered to attempt to replicate the experiment with a hastily assembled Lang-Scranton stabilizer copy. The result is an explosion that kills 3 of them. Senior researchers also approach SCP-343, a powerful reality warper known to some as God, hoping to get some insight from him about where Dr. Scranton could be found. His response is,
"He's beyond any of us now. I'm truly, dreadfully sorry."
Anna starts having nightmares. She twists and turns in bed, haunted by visions of her beloved Robert consumed by darkness. A strange specter starts to appear in her dreams, a man with a horrible, rotted face. She turns to her bedside table in the night, numbers blurry on the screen of her alarm clock. The photograph of herself and Robert that she keeps there. Something is wrong with him, wrong with his face. Is it that same awful, rotted man? She screams and closes her eyes. When she opens them, the photo is normal again. She weeps into her pillow. It can't keep going on like this.
This place, it's some sort of reality gap, I think. If I don't concentrate on it, it's fine, but I feel this tingling all over my face. I'm not sure why.
2 months, 15 days, 4 hours.
Anna begins to accept the horrible truth. She may not see Robert ever again, and holding on to the foolish fantasy that she will is starting to kill her. She repeats it to herself like a mantra at work. Robert Scranton is dead. Robert Scranton is dead. Robert Scranton is dead. One day, a coworker notices her muttering and strikes up a conversation. It's been years since Robert disappeared. What's the harm in talking to someone again? She even finds herself smiling and laughing at his jokes, but when he asks if she'd like to go for coffee, she gets a flash of Robert screaming in the darkness, of that terrible, rotted face, grinning. She runs to the bathroom to throw up and weep.
The tingling in my face has worsened. I wish I could sleep here, but all this damn gunfire overhead, can't take it anymore. Can't take it.
Trench foot, shell shock. Hell would be a reprieve in a place like this. And all the men, all the poor souls who look up to me, call me Corporal. What a jerk. To think I have any more idea of what's going on here. Anna can hear it in his voice. He's getting worn down. As Anna feels her emotions start to dull and fade, she begins accepting more dangerous assignments from her superiors, perhaps hoping just to feel something again. She works on the SCP-682 case, trying to devise more futile termination methods. She spends time with SCP-939, the abominations known as With Many Voices, until they start to imitate Robert's voice, and she knows that she can't do this anymore. She works with SCP-280, Eyes in the Dark, feeling no fear whatsoever as it floats towards her. The worst thing that could possibly happen to her has happened already. Now, she's just waiting, killing time. She has no idea of the further horrors to come. Lately, I've been hearing whispers in the dark. I think the rats are talking to me. Oh, funny. My troops must think me mad. What does it matter? This is a mad place, a mad time. A mad man is perhaps best suited to a time like this.
So many went over the top yesterday, only to be cut down by machine gun fire. Isn't it odd that I laughed? It was so funny.
I think perhaps this mental malady is connected to a physical one. Nosebleeds and vomiting spells. A strange, black liquid. Faintly acidic to the touch. But so delicious. So fun. My troops tell me I look unwell. Like anything about this is well. Maybe I'll sneak into one of their bedsits tonight and teach them to lighten up a bit. None of them smile anymore. Me, I'm always smiling. I'll teach those little cowards to smile too. But as she listens to more of the logs, she's forced to reckon with the fact it really isn't him anymore. Not as she'd ever known him. He'd become something else. All the others are dead. All my good, hard work, making them dead. I followed them down the length of the trench. Their silly little bullets didn't hurt me. Oh no. Oh no. The look on their faces. All the screaming as they saw me. How thrilling to savor their fear as I approached. All those screams. What are you, you horrible old man? I showed them what I am. I can walk through walls now, you know. Have all the fun I want. Yes. Nothing can hurt me anymore. And I can hurt everyone.
And when the war is over, I'll go home. Go home to my sweetheart. I know she's waiting for me. I can't wait to see her, to touch her beautiful face. My lovely.
Lovely Anna.
Hearing him like this, so broken, so utterly transformed, it's too much for her to bear. But the work always needs her, and she returns to it day after day. One night, she sits up late, making her way through a stack of paperwork, when she hears it. A curious sound. Drip, drip, drip. Something thick dripping steadily onto the floor behind her. The smell of rot fills her nostrils, making her gag. She turns and comes face to face with SCP-106, dripping its slimy black mucus onto the floor, bringing decay to everything it touches. It reaches out toward her, grasping at her arm. She breaks free, but not before its touch melts away the fibers of her lab coat, threatening to seep through the fabric to her skin. All the while, it's staring straight at her, like it knows her. Anna runs out of the lab as fast as she can, shouting for help. A guard tries to come to her assistance, firing his weapon at the old man, but the bullets don't leave a dent, don't even slow him down. The old man grabs the weapon from the guard's hands, letting the metal rust, warp, and melt in his grasp. Then he turns his corrosive touch on the guard's face. Anna screams in horror at the sight, but she can do nothing to help him. All that she can do is keep running and hope that the monster doesn't catch her. She runs as fast as her legs can carry her, but she isn't as young as she once was, and years of sitting at a desk have made her muscles stiff and weak. Her foot hits the ground at just the wrong angle, and she stumbles, falling to the ground. She scrambles back to her feet, but when she looks up, something is horribly wrong. Her surroundings have changed. It looks like the Foundation site, but it's not quite the same. It's as if someone tried to recreate the facility from memory and couldn't retain all of the details. Then she hears it again. The drip, drip, drip. He's here. She spins around, and there it is. That awful face, so close to her own. She takes a trembling step back when suddenly, the monster speaks. It's him. She knows it, as surely as she knows that she is about to die. The monster that once was Robert Scranton reaches out and caresses Anna's cheek with his wrinkled hand. She screams as the skin begins to droop, and he seals her lips with a kiss that makes her insides drip like melting wax. The two become one once again. An elderly woman wakes in the middle of the night to the sounds of chaos just outside. She stumbles out of her bed in her nightgown, carrying a lantern, and rushes to check on the cows in her field. From a distance in the dark, she can see one of the cows lying on its side, dead. Standing over it is a fox, but something is wrong with it. The animal is standing on two legs, using its paw-like hands to tear at the cow's corpse. She drops her lantern and screams. It is the late 1940s, and the world is still reeling from the destruction and devastation of the Second World War. While nations are trying desperately to rebuild and citizens are mourning the fallen, the SCP Foundation has no time to grieve. Anomalous threats don't come to a stop just because the rest of the world is trying to put its collective pieces back together. For the members of the 5th Squad of the Eastern Division of the SCP Foundation, a global tragedy must take a back seat to smaller, localized, and potentially anomalous tragedy in the form of several unusual deaths in Busan, Korea. 3 agents are dispatched to the area and told to investigate while posing as reporters covering the story. When they first arrive, they hear about a troubling eyewitness account that has steered local authorities in the direction of animal attacks. An elderly woman saw something eating one of her cows, a mix between a fox and a human. Naturally, the authorities have written her off, but something in her story rings true to one of the agents. He can remember tales his grandmother once told him, sadistic old bat that she was. Stories of fox people with razor-sharp claws and fangs glistening with fresh blood. The other 2 agents have similar cultural stories to share, folk tales about women who were foxes in disguise, living amongst hapless humans. Some of the stories were romantic, about fox wives marrying human husbands, having children and families. Others were horrible, too horrible to repeat. The 3 agents can only hope they haven't stumbled into the latter type of story. But when has a mission from the SCP Foundation ever led to a fairy tale outcome? The three men begin to comb the area, searching for any evidence of this creature, a fox person with a taste for hunting cows, and perhaps humans as well. Before very long at all, they stumble upon a beautiful young woman sitting serenely under a waterfall. Clad in nothing more than a light robe, she tries to nervously hide her bare feet at the sight of the strange men. But she doesn't do a very good job. The three agents can plainly see, in place of the feet of a human woman, she has paws covered in reddish-brown fur, the feet of a fox. This must be a young, inexperienced creature of her kind, they realize. Otherwise, how could they have tracked her down so easily? If the men were smarter, less blinded by lust, laziness, and an eagerness for simple answers, they might have asked more questions. Questions like, why did we find her so quickly? Why isn't she hiding? How did she get close enough to kill those people when she's so bad at concealing herself? But they don't stop and think, don't stop to ask those questions, and that oversight will be what seals their fate. After realizing that the agents intend her no apparent harm, the fox woman smiles warmly at them. She invites the men to come back to her cottage with her for a hot meal and the chance to meet more of her kind. At first, Agent 3 is unsure about the offer, but the other two accept eagerly, swayed by the majority vote, and reminding himself that they are three armed men against one slender, if anomalous, woman. He relents and accepts the invitation as well. They follow the lovely woman, like flies buzzing eagerly into a spider's web, without the slightest inkling of what's to come. When they reach the cottage, they find it modest but homey, rustic but warm. It has a certain undeniable charm, the same charm shared by the woman who led them there. She sits them at the dining table, the picture of delighted hospitality. She insists on serving them, and they are all too happy to let her. She pours them cups of plum wine and dishes out bowls of rice, pickled turnips, and perfectly seasoned meat. After dinner, with full bellies and sleepy, wine-fogged minds, the agents decide to stay the night in her guest beds. After all, why shouldn't they? The creature seems to mean them no harm, and she has no reason to feel threatened or try to attack them in any way. They'll see about containment options in the morning, after a good night's rest. Sometime in the night, Agent 3 wakes to find Agent 1 is gone. Strangely, he must have gotten up to use the bathroom in the night, or rather to make use of a bush outside, since there is no formal bathroom in the cottage. The thought reminds Agent 3 of his own full bladder, and he tiptoes out into the night to relieve himself. As he stumbles through the darkness, he suddenly hears muffled groaning, the wet slap of flesh against flesh. All at once, it hits him. Agent 1 must be out here, and from the sound of it, he isn't alone. Surely he wouldn't, but up ahead, he can make out the silhouettes of Agent 1 and the Foxwoman together. That's a Foundation ethics violation of some kind, it has to be. Agent 3 opens his mouth to say something when Agent 1 suddenly collapses to the ground in front of the Foxwoman. As his eyes adjust to the dark, Agent 3 can see that his fallen friend's shirt is stained with blood, and his throat has been ripped out. In her clawed hand, the Foxwoman holds Agent 1's liver, steaming with body heat in the cool night air. She lifts the organ up, examining it with a hungry glint in her eye. Then she opens her mouth, sticks out her tongue, and swallows the liver in a single gulp. The sight reminds Agent 3 of a snake devouring a mouse, and his stomach turns as disgust, horror, and grief overwhelm his system all at once. He watched as the Foxwoman lowered one extra sharp fingernail, using it like a scalpel, and began to cut at the fallen man's skin. All at once, his legs are able to move again. He sprints back toward the cottage, shaking Agent 2 awake. Agent 3 can't quite get his words together. His thoughts scrambled from the horror he just witnessed, but he manages to get one coherent sentence out. "We need to leave. Now." Before Agent 2 can ask what the hell is going on, Agent 1 walks into the room as if nothing ever happened. Much to Agent 3's shock, the man doesn't have a gaping hole where his liver should be. That's impossible. But wait, his eyes. They're glowing yellow. That's not an SCP Foundation agent. Something is terribly wrong. Agent 3 doesn't have time to explain to the other agent what's happening. He doesn't have time to think. All he has time to do is draw his weapon and fire at the imposter. As anyone might do in this maddening situation, Agent 2 draws his weapon, pointing it at 3 and ordering him to put the weapon away. 3 tries to explain, to convince him that the man he just shot is not their friend. but the Fox in disguise. He won't listen, promising to put Agent 3 down like a mad dog for killing their comrade. That's when the Fox sees her opening. She grabs hold of Agent 2 from behind, knocking the gun out of his hand, causing it to discharge. Agent 3 cries out in pain as the bullet pierces his flesh. Only his upper shoulder, thankfully. Not a fatal wound, but it still hurts like absolute hell. He collapses to the ground from the pain, screaming, while the Fox laughs at his misery. It's a truly demonic sound, a loud, high cackle, like nothing he's ever heard before. The sound is too much. He has to get away from it, away from her. Put something between him and this monster. He drags himself into the living room, pulling the rice paper screen door shut. It won't protect him, but at least he doesn't have to look at her. Unfortunately, another horror awaits him there. On the dining table, laid out like a roast pig ready for carving, is another agent, a man he and the others saw at the base of the mountain a day before. But now, his eyes are wide and glassy, his skin pale and lifeless. He spots the empty bowls, and all at once, the sickening truth washes over him. Their dinner, that meat wasn't pork or beef. It was human. And they didn't eat it with rice, but with maggots, crawling over the meat, slippery and white. His stomach can't help but empty itself, and as he heaves onto the floor, he sees a few maggots still alive in the vomit. No time to think about it anymore. No time to sit with the horrors and let them paralyze him. He needs a weapon, and fast. He manages to snap off a piece of a wooden beam, breaking it into a jagged edge. He angles it just right, just in time for the foxwoman to tear through the rice paper door. He jams the jagged edge of the wooden beam into her stomach and makes a run for it. He tears out of the cottage and into the forest, tripping over the rugged landscape and fighting through the agony of his gunshot wound. Suddenly, the sound of running water, a welcome oasis in the dark and the terror. He stumbles onto the riverbank, attempting to wade through the water and cross. But he has too many forces working against him. The pitch-black night, the fear, the pain, the confusion from the blood loss. He slips on the wet rocks, hits his head, and is swept away by the rapids. He floats down the river for at least half a mile before he grabs hold of a branch strong enough to pull himself back out of the water. As he drags himself onto dry land, heaving and gasping, he realizes something. He recognizes where he is. The van is just a few feet away. He has a sudden revelation. Fire. In the stories he heard growing up, fire was always the key to defeating an evil force. He doesn't have the keys, but that doesn't matter. He busts through the window and opens up the back. There it is, a Foundation-issued defoliant projector, better known as a good old-fashioned flamethrower. This should do it, if that evil woman manages to track him down again. As if summoned by his thoughts, there she is, emerging out of the tree line. She smiles at him, eyes gleaming with menace. He raises the flamethrower and prepares to rain down hell on the monster that killed his friends and fed him their flesh. Several days later, a Foundation retrieval team manages to track down Agent 3. They find him with the Foxwoman, whom they manage to capture and bring into custody. He is a shadow of himself, pale, sweaty, body fighting off a severe infection. He's quickly taken to a hospital to recuperate. Meanwhile, the Foundation is able to study the Foxwoman, who is designated SCP-953, the Polymorphic Humanoid. About SCP-953, a few things are certain. She is a female red fox, approximately 8 kilograms in weight, with a spine that splits around her 26th vertebra into 9 separate tails. She has polymorphic properties and is able to take on various other forms. Most commonly, she takes on the shape of a beautiful Korean woman. Whenever in a human form, however, she does still maintain at least one fox-like characteristic, such as ears, paws, tail, eyes, or mannerisms. If she is able, she will attempt to conceal these elements through various methods of disguise, such as clothing, hats, and hairstyles. In addition to her polymorphic abilities, SCP-953 is observed to possess other supernatural abilities. She has the power of suggestion and telepathy. She can convince others of falsehoods, concealing her nature and the nature of things around her. While the Foundation is discovering this, Agent 3 is busy recovering from his injuries. When he is discharged from the hospital, he sits down for an interview with the Foundation Assistant Director. He lays out the Foundation's plans to terminate the Foxwoman, given her malicious nature and unknown levels of power. Agent 3 vehemently opposes this choice, begging them not to do so. He advises them to contain her, but to be cautious about how they do so. Ordinary methods, he advises, will not be effective. He pleads with the Foundation to consider the creature's nature, saying, "She's spiteful. Every little slight in her eyes, she saves up. And the only way she knows how to repay an insult is death. Chaining her to the wall like an animal, when she gets out, and she will get out, she's going to kill everyone who had the slightest thing to do with it. She won't settle for anything less." He gives suggestions for what the Foundation can do to contain the creature, but above all, insists that she be kept alive. At this point, the interviewer points out that the agent has been visiting SCP-953 in her containment cell. He questions the agent's motives, suggesting he might have Stockholm Syndrome. The agent refuses to consider that possibility. In return, the interviewer has him taken to Site 51 for psychological analysis. The containment procedures are left unchanged. The interviewer includes this note with a transcription of the interview. On a side note, I am appalled by the level of superstition expressed by the agent throughout the course of this interview. I am recommending that his suggestions regarding containment be disregarded for a more scientific approach. We're not old Korean fishwives here. I'm sure we can think of something more effective than dogs and needles. Not long after the interview, SCP-953 escapes from custody, killing several Foundation personnel in the process. They managed to recapture her, but she escaped again, and again, and again. After her sixth escape, the Foundation is unable to track her down. She remains unseen for years, sneaking around under the radar, as the Foundation waits for the inevitable bloodbath that will ensue when she gets bored enough. Years pass, and the date of the annual YIFCon rolls around again. This is of little interest to the Foundation. Why would they be monitoring the goings-on of a small furry convention? Well, maybe they should be, because there is no better place in the world for a foxwoman to pass unnoticed. If anything, with only her ears and tail showing through her human form, she's a bit underdressed compared to the rest of the attendees. A few convention-goers stop to admire the beautiful woman with the reddish-brown fox ears and tail, but most of them don't even give her a second glance. Unfortunately for the convention's attendees, she has far more malicious plans than supporting small businesses by purchasing some art or a body pillow. She passes out cards with her room number on them to various strangers, inviting them to an after-hours party in her room. With her friendly face and gorgeous smile, how could they say no? After all, it's a friendly event, and nothing bad ever happens at YIFCon. When a dozen anthropomorphic animal enthusiasts arrive at SCP-953's room, they find a few bottles of wine and an uneasy atmosphere. Still, they're excited to socialize and thrilled to have been invited to an after-hours party. They don't notice her sliding the deadbolt into place behind them, placing her body between them and their only exit. An hour later, another hotel guest calls the police to alert them to the sounds of horrific screams coming from down the hall. But when the police arrive, they can't hear anything. The place is eerily quiet. As they approach the offending room, they hear the sounds of a respectfully tame party inside, and a beautiful woman answers the door, assuring them that everything is fine. The officers turn and leave without a second thought, and as the victims inside the room continue to scream, the cops can't hear a thing. They don't know it, but they're trapped in her thrall. The next morning, a hotel housekeeper knocks on the door of the ill-fated room. No one answers, and there isn't a Do Not Disturb sign on the door, so she lets herself in. As soon as she opens the door, she regrets it. There, so engrossed in her gleeful bloodlust that she doesn't even notice the intrusion, is SCP-953, surrounded by dozens of corpses. The housekeeper calls 911, but after stuttering out a few words on the situation, a clawed hand grabs hold of her hair and yanks her back inside. The poor housekeeper will never be seen again. Not alive, anyway. Fortunately, it was enough information to alert the Foundation to the situation at hand. Unfortunately, by the time they arrive on the scene, there are over 24 corpses littering the hotel floor. One is stuffed into a mattress, another hanging over a shower curtain rod, one rolled up in a carpet, and another is strewn across a banquet table. Any survivors are brought into Foundation custody and given Class A amnestics to wipe their memories. The convention concludes early, under the cover story of a dangerous gas leak. During the chaos, the Foundation managed to bring SCP-953 into custody. This time, they acknowledge the need to amend the containment procedures they have been using. They can't let her escape again. Today, SCP-953 is kept in a Type 4 containment cell at Site-17. She is provided the following necessities: fresh liver daily, clean drinking water and plenty of it, a futon and clean bedding for it, which is laundered weekly. When she is on her best behavior and has been especially non-violent, she is occasionally presented with a small luxury item, such as a book, a dessert, or a bottle of plum wine. Direct human contact with SCP-953 has been strictly prohibited due to her psychic abilities. Delivery of her food or any other items is to be carried out by an automated robotic assistant. In addition to her physical containment, psychological measures with a folkloric origin have been employed. The entrance to her containment chamber is lined with open-cage dog kennels containing Korean Jindo or American Foxhound dogs. She will not approach any canines out of an apparent aversion, especially when one is barking. SCP-953 is considered extremely hostile, dangerous, and armed at all times, given the nature of her razor-sharp claws and numerous deadly abilities. I found this addendum attached to her official file concerning folklore control procedures as they pertain to SCP-953. As a reminder, staff assigned to SCP-953 are to follow all instructions for interacting with the subject, no matter how odd or arbitrary they may seem. Keep in mind that the people of Asia interacted with these beings for centuries before we came onto the scene. What we think of as fairy tales were their version of special containment procedures. Personally, I hope to never encounter SCP-953 under any circumstances. Though, as I say that, a disquieting thought crosses my mind. It's entirely possible I have, at some point, and simply didn't know it. After all, she is capable of shifting her shape in countless ways, and is a master of trickery and deception. I may very well have crossed paths with her before. I suppose I'll never know for sure. All I know is that I still have my liver. For now. And for that, I am very, very grateful. Check out the DrBob Patreon and become a junior researcher today. Now go and watch another entry from the files of DrBob, like SCP-4966, Tabioka, Devourer of Souls, Consumer of Secrets, Lord of Munchies.